I never planned for the forest to become my confessor, but sometimes the silence presses against you so heavily it drags the truth out whether you're ready or not. My name is Daniel Hayes. I'm 39 years old, and for most of my adult life, I've worn the uniform of a forest ranger. People like to imagine it's all guiding lost hikers back to trailheads or watching the sunrise from a mountain overlook, but that's the postcard version. What they don't see are the nights when the wind rattles the pines like bones, when the radio goes dead, and when even the stars seem to be listening instead of shining. The Rockies, my territory, are not just mountains. They are vast corridors of stone and shadow where the weather changes with the temperament of something alive. Here, solitude isn't a choice. It's a weight draped across your shoulders. And when you're sent on solo duty, like I was for that week in late October, you learn how thin the barrier is between steady breath and panic. That morning, the station smelled of coffee grounds and pine cleaner. My supervisor handed me the assignment as casually as if he were giving me a grocery list. Patrol the southern ridge sector, monitor late-season hikers, keep eyes on the cave systems where bears might den early. You'll be alone out there, he said, pausing just long enough to make me wonder if he knew more than he was saying. I loaded my pack with the usual gear: radio, maps, flare gun, notebook, flashlight, water, and the heavy revolver I almost never drew. My truck carried me up switchbacks until the air thinned, crisp with the bite of approaching snow. The plan was simple: set camp in one of the designated clearings, sweep trails by day, check the caves by evening, radio in each night. 1 week of solitude, then back to human voices. That's what I told myself. The first day carried a kind of fragile beauty: yellow aspens trembling in the wind, elk calls echoing from ridges, the scent of damp needles underfoot. But beneath that beauty was something else, an unsettled rhythm in the forest. Birdsong stopped too abruptly. Pine shadows stretched in ways that looked deliberate. My instincts whispered caution, and like too many times before, I ignored them. A ranger is supposed to be rational, steady, the one others lean on. Fear doesn't belong in the job description, or so I thought. By dusk, I had my tent pitched near a creek. The water's surface reflected strips of violet sky. I built a small fire, jotted my notes, and leaned back against a log, convincing myself that the unease was just the first night of solitude. That was when I heard it, the sound that cracked the silence open like a bone splitting. A single knock. Not woodpecker chatter, not a branch snapping, but a deliberate knock, as if someone rapped their knuckles against a hollow tree trunk. I froze. The knock came again, 3 beats this time, spaced evenly. I scanned the tree line, flame flickering in my periphery. My rational brain whispered explanations, echoing stones, a deer striking antlers against bark. But deep down, something primitive stirred, reminding me that humans are not the oldest tenants of these mountains. The knocking stopped, replaced by a hush thicker than before. My fire sputtered. I told myself it was nothing. Yet I sat with my hand on the revolver until the embers collapsed. I barely slept, ears straining against the weight of silence, every gust of wind mistaken for breath. By morning, I convinced myself I'd exaggerated the whole thing. Fatigue, nerves, imagination. I hiked the trail with forced confidence, boots crunching frost, radio static in my pocket. At the second cave on my patrol route, the air turned colder than the outside wind. My flashlight beam met walls scarred with claw marks, but they were higher than a bear could reach. I measured with my eyes, at least 9 feet off the ground. I swallowed, knuckles tightening around the flashlight. Bear stretch marks, I muttered, though the words felt like paper lies against stone. My notebook recorded it clinically. Cave 2, marks present, possible bear activity. The truth was harder to write. Too tall. Too deliberate. That night, camp felt wrong again. Not threatening, not yet, but charged as though static electricity hung between every tree. I boiled water for coffee, anything to keep me awake. When the knock returned, it didn't come from the trees. It came from my tent wall. 3 raps, firm and patient, inches from my ear. My breath locked in my throat. I held the revolver, finger trembling on the trigger, but I couldn't bring myself to unzip the flap. Whoever, or whatever, stood outside. It waited, its presence heavier than the canvas between us. After what felt like an hour but was likely seconds, the knocks faded into the forest, absorbed by the cold night. I didn't sleep. I sat until dawn cracked the ridges, until my body ached from vigilance. That morning, my reflection in the creek looked older, eyes shadowed, lips dry. That was only day 2. The next days blurred into a rhythm of dread. Patrols by day, where every cave breathed cold warnings. Nights by fire, where the knocks came sometimes from trees, sometimes from stones, once even from beneath the earth itself. Always steady, always patient. I began doubting my own senses. Was it real? Or was solitude sharpening my mind into weapons against itself? One afternoon, following elk tracks deeper into the valley, I found something carved into a fallen trunk. Not initials, not ranger markings. It was a symbol, a rough spiral, wide and jagged, with a line slashed through its center. Moss grew inside the grooves as if it had been there for years, yet the cuts were clean, sharp. My stomach turned cold. By then, the forest no longer felt like wilderness. It felt inhabited by something older than the maps, older than even the stories whispered by locals. I recalled a tale told to me by an old rancher when I first took the post. He spoke of a figure stalking the ridges, tall as 2 men, hair like matted pine needles, eyes that glowed without fire. A yeti. He called it with a half smile, though his tone lacked humor. At the time, I'd laughed it off. Now the memory returned like a thorn buried under skin. That night, the knocking changed. Instead of 3 raps, it drew out into 5, slower, deeper, as though whatever made the sound wanted me to know it was adapting. The air around camp smelled different too. Rank, musky like wet fur left to rot. My gut screamed at me to leave, but duty chained me to the ground. Rangers don't abandon posts over whispers in the dark. I lasted another night before I broke. The knocking came closer, circling the tent, until I could hear heavy exhalations threading through the nylon. My pulse hammered. The revolver shook in my hand. When the sound stopped, I thought I might finally rest, but then came the worst part. A voice. Low, guttural, barely shaped into words, it spoke my name. Daniel. Every nerve in my body rebelled. My name had never sounded like that before, dragged, stretched, ground into syllables as if by a throat not meant to speak. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The voice came again, closer, the syllables wet. Daniel. And then silence. When morning arrived, my tent was untouched, yet the earth outside was pressed with impressions. Massive, misshapen, like footprints but too wide, too long. I measured one against my boot. It swallowed mine whole. I wanted to radio in to confess I was compromised, but shame burned hotter than fear. I was a ranger, protector of hikers, a rational man. If I reported hearing my name whispered in the night, they'd laugh. Or worse, they'd doubt me. So I shouldered the secret like a stone in my chest and pushed through the remaining days, waiting for the week to end. But the forest wasn't done with me yet. The morning after the voice spoke my name, I forced myself through the motions of normal duty. I brewed coffee, wrote a few clipped lines in my notebook, shouldered my pack, and stepped onto the trail as though my feet weren't shaking with every step. But the air felt wrong, heavier than before, as though the forest itself had decided to notice me. Every sound was amplified, the snap of frost underfoot, the flutter of a raven's wing, the drip of meltwater slipping from a rock ledge. Each noise felt intentional, as if the land were rehearsing its vocabulary in my presence. I patrolled the caves again, though I dreaded them more with each visit. The 3rd cave lay half concealed by boulders, its entrance like a dark, toothless mouth. The beam of my flashlight met walls slick with condensation. Deep inside, the air smelled like copper and wet stone, but there was another note beneath it, something organic, sour like fur damp with sweat. I crouched near the wall to study marks again. These weren't claws this time. They were symbols, spirals carved into stone, wider than my outstretched arms. Fresh shavings lay on the ground, damp and sharp-edged. They hadn't been there before. My throat closed. Someone or something had been inside this cave after my last visit. I raised my flashlight higher and saw what made my skin go cold. Embedded in a crack of the wall, at least 8 feet up, was a tuft of hair. Gray-brown, coarse, thicker than any animal I'd cataloged in training. I plucked it with tweezers, sealed it in a sample bag, and shoved it into my pocket. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Back at camp, I tried the radio. Static hissed, broken by faint bursts of words that dissolved before I could decipher them. I lifted the receiver again and again, calling in, my own voice trembling. No response. The radio had worked fine the day before. That night it offered only fractured whispers, like fragments of someone else's conversation bleeding into my frequency. As dusk collapsed into night, the knocking began again, this time from 2 directions at once. One behind the tent, one near the creek. I clenched the revolver until my knuckles burned, every muscle screaming at me to run, but I held still. The knocks stopped abruptly, replaced by the heavy sound of something walking through the brush. Slow, deliberate, pacing a wide circle around my camp. My fire hissed in the damp air. Smoke curled into my lungs and made me cough, a sharp sound that broke the rhythm of the night. The walking stopped. Silence pressed in. Then from just beyond the tree line, the voice returned. Daniel. Drawn out, rasping, thick with an accent no human throat should carry. My skin prickled. The firelight seemed to shrink, retreating from the edges of camp. I wanted to scream, to demand what it wanted, but my voice deserted me. Instead, I sat frozen until dawn stained the peaks pink. When I stumbled outside, the ground was marked again. Footprints, but clearer this time. Not quite human, not quite animal. Toes spread too wide, nails dragging deep. Each print pressed inches into the earth, as though the weight of the body that made it belonged to something larger than I dared to imagine. On day 4, exhaustion dragged me down. Every step on patrol felt like wading through mud. My hands trembled when I lifted the radio, though I knew it wouldn't work. The forest had shifted from adversary to judge, waiting to see how much I could endure before breaking. I found another carving that afternoon, this time on a standing tree. The spiral again, but longer now, stretched from knee-height to above my head. The line through its center was jagged, as though carved in anger. At the base of the trunk, I found bones, small ones, like from a hare or raccoon. They were arranged in a circle, their points all facing inward. The marrow had been sucked clean. I dropped to my knees, staring, my stomach twisting. Something intelligent had done this, something with patience and ritual. My notebook recorded it with trembling script, unidentified markings, remains at base. I left the page half-filled. Writing the truth felt like giving it permanence. That night the temperature plummeted. Frost laced my tent seams, my breath spilling out in clouds. The forest had gone silent. No owls, no crickets, no wind, just silence, thick and absolute. I huddled near the fire, revolver heavy in my lap. Hours passed, slow as glaciers. Then, faintly, I smelled it. That same musky stench, closer this time. Damp fur, rotting leaves, sweat carried on cold air. I tightened my grip on the revolver. My eyes scanned the darkness. The smell thickened, curling around me like smoke. I lifted my headlamp and caught a glimpse. 2 faint reflections in the dark. Eye shine, higher than a man's head. Motionless, watching. My chest locked. For minutes I stared back at those eyes, unable to blink. And then, without a sound, they vanished. No footfall, no breaking brush, just gone as though they had never been there at all. Sleep never came. At dawn, I stumbled into the creek to wash my face, my reflection broken in the rippling water. And when I lifted my head, I saw it, a handprint on the fogged surface of my tent. Too large, fingers too long, the palm pressed deep enough to smear condensation. I backed away, every nerve screaming. Day 5 was a blur of denial. I told myself I'd imagined it, that exhaustion was warping my senses, that the footprints were bear tracks distorted by melting frost, that the carvings were old graffiti from some forgotten hermit. But my heart knew better. The land itself seemed to resist those excuses, echoing with every step I took. That afternoon, I ventured farther south along the ridge, hoping distance might grant me clarity. Instead, I found something worse. A cave I hadn't logged on the map. Its entrance was narrow, hidden behind fallen rock, but the air that wafted from it was foul, stale, sweet with decay. Against my better judgment, I crawled inside. The beam of my flashlight trembled across the walls. Bones, piles of them, scattered along the floor. Elk, deer, smaller creatures too. Some cracked, others gnawed. And in the center, arranged carefully, were stones stacked into a crude circle. Inside the circle lay more bones, but not animal. They were long, thin, unmistakably human. My stomach lurched. I stumbled back, slamming my shoulder into the wall. My flashlight beam swung wildly, catching on something carved above the circle. Another spiral, larger, deeper, carved so forcefully the rock flaked around it. The smell of rot grew stronger, so thick I gagged. And then from the darkness deeper in the cave, I heard it. Not knocking this time. Breathing. Slow. Massive. Wet. My legs moved before my mind caught up. I scrambled out, knees scraping rock, palms torn open. I burst into daylight, gasping, my chest burning. Behind me, the cave mouth remained silent, but I knew something had been there, something that had watched me invade its space. By the time I reached camp, the sun was setting. My hands shook so badly I couldn't strike a match for the fire. When I finally lit it, the flames roared too high, too hungry, as if they knew they were the only barrier left between me and whatever hunted me. That night, the knocking didn't come. The voice didn't whisper. The silence was worse. It meant the thing was no longer testing me. It was waiting. As I sat there, staring into the flames, I realized the truth I had avoided for days. This wasn't about a lone ranger encountering a strange animal. This was something older, something bound to the caves, to the spirals, to the bones. And I was no longer a protector of the forest. I was prey. By the 6th morning, my body was an instrument of exhaustion. My hands shook when I laced my boots, my eyes burned from sleepless nights, and the forest seemed to lean closer with every breath I took. Even the creek water, once crisp and clean, tasted metallic on my tongue. I crouched by the bank and tried to swallow it anyway, but my stomach turned, as if the land itself had soured against me. The radio was still dead, spitting static like laughter. I tried again and again, my voice breaking as I called headquarters, called anyone. But the only reply was a faint warbled hum, like someone breathing across the frequency. Once, I thought I heard words, but they slipped through my grasp before I could catch them. The forest didn't just want my silence. It wanted me to believe no one existed outside its borders. I forced myself onto patrol, though every step carried the weight of dread. The trails I had walked a dozen times before now seemed foreign, as if they had rearranged themselves overnight. Trees I recognized yesterday leaned at strange angles. Rock formations stood where I swore there had been only open ground. It was as if the land was reconfiguring itself to trap me. Halfway up the ridge, I heard the sound again. Knocking, but not wood against wood this time. Stone against stone. Rhythmic, measured, echoing across the valley like a drum. I froze, listening, my pulse racing. The pattern grew louder, closer, until it felt like the very ground beneath me was striking itself in time. I pressed my back against a tree, forcing shallow breaths. The knocking stopped as abruptly as it began. In its place came a sound worse than silence. Laughter. Low, guttural, distorted as though filtered through layers of stone. It rose from the valley, rolled across the trees, and burrowed into my chest. The laughter carried weight, like it knew me, like it found me amusing. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I forced myself forward. A ranger doesn't flee shadows, I told myself, though every step was betrayal of my body's deepest fears. I followed the sound to the southern slope, where a cave mouth yawned wider than the rest. The entrance was jagged, as if ripped open, the stone blackened around its edges. My flashlight beam revealed nothing but a long throat of darkness, and then I smelled it again. Thick, musky, rancid. My head swam. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. That was when I saw the footprint, larger than the others, pressed deep into the mud near the entrance, longer than my arm from heel to toe, the weight behind it sinking inches into the earth. I dropped to one knee, staring, unable to breathe. The edges were sharp, fresh, Whatever made it had been there moments before. The wind shifted, carrying a whisper through the trees. Not a voice this time, not words, but something worse, the shape of a voice, the cadence of syllables, but without language. My mind tried to assign meaning to fit it into the human patterns it knew, but it slipped away each time. The sound wasn't meant for me, yet it reached me all the same. I stumbled back to camp long before sunset, breaking my own rule. My body trembled so violently I could barely light the fire. Flames snapped, sparks rising like desperate prayers. I huddled near them, clutching the revolver, whispering to myself just to keep my voice alive. When darkness fell, the forest moved, not in the way it always moves, branches swaying, animals foraging, but in a deliberate, purposeful way. I heard footsteps surrounding camp, circling slowly, heavy, dragging, more than one set. My heart hammered. My breath came shallow and quick. And then, from the black line of trees, I saw it. A figure, taller than any man, its shoulders hunched, its outline shifting in the firelight. Fur hung in tangled mats from its limbs. Its head was too large, too broad, with eyes that caught the flames and reflected them back at me in molten gold. It didn't rush me. It didn't hide. It stood just beyond the fire's reach, watching. My mouth went dry. I raised the revolver, arms shaking so badly I could barely aim. The figure didn't flinch. It tilted its head, slow, deliberate, as though studying me the way I studied tracks. The air thickened with that musky, rancid smell, choking me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Time stretched, broke. Finally, the creature did something I will never forget. It raised its hand, massive, long-fingered, and knocked its knuckles against a tree beside it. 3 steady raps. The same rhythm I had heard every night. The sound echoed through my chest like a hammer against bone. My vision blurred. I wanted to fire, to scream, to do anything but sit frozen. But my finger refused to pull the trigger. Deep down, I knew that firing wouldn't stop it. It wasn't an animal I could kill. It was something older, rooted in the land itself. The figure lingered, then stepped backward into the shadows. Its golden eyes faded, swallowed by the dark. The footsteps retreated, slow, measured, until silence closed in again. I collapsed by the fire, my revolver clattering to the dirt. My body shook so violently I thought my bones might break. Tears burned my eyes, though I didn't understand why. Fear, relief, or the crushing realization that I was utterly powerless. When dawn came, I staggered from the tent, eyes hollow, muscles stiff. The clearing was empty. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing but the faint imprint of a hand against the tree where the knocks had landed. The spiral symbol had been carved into the bark overnight, clean and fresh. I sank to my knees. My rational mind fought to explain it. Pranksters, hallucination, exhaustion. But the deeper part of me knew better. The thing I'd seen was real, and it wasn't finished with me. Day 7, the final day, rose gray and lifeless. I packed my gear with trembling hands, each movement mechanical, my mind hollowed out. My only thought was survival. If I could endure this final night, I'd return to the station, to human voices, to light. But the forest didn't let me go so easily. That afternoon, as I trudged along the ridge, the sky darkened with sudden clouds. Wind howled through the pines, carrying with it the smell of rotten fur. The knocking returned, this time from every direction, a chorus that shook the air. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the sound burrowed inside me. The spirals appeared everywhere, on trees, on stones, even scratched into the dirt at my feet. Fresh, deliberate, multiplying as I walked. I stumbled, gasping, my vision narrowing. The forest wasn't just inhabited, it was alive, and it wanted me marked. I reached camp by dusk, though I barely recognized it. The trees seemed closer, the clearing smaller, the firewood damp. My hands wouldn't obey me when I tried to strike a flame. The matches broke, one after another, until I was left in darkness. That night, the voice returned, not whispering my name this time, not even forming words. It rose from the trees, from the stones, from the very ground beneath me, a guttural chant, a rhythm that matched the pounding of my own heart. I curled in the tent, revolver clutched to my chest, every nerve screaming. Shadows pressed against the canvas, too large, too many. I could hear breathing, slow and heavy, encircling me. And then, just as the chant reached its peak, everything stopped. The forest fell silent. The air stilled. For a long moment, I thought I had gone deaf. When I opened my eyes, the first light of dawn spilled across the tent. My watch told me it was morning. Day 8. My week was over. I stumbled out of the tent to find the clearing empty. The spirals were gone, the footprints erased. Even the smell had lifted. It was as though the forest had swallowed the evidence whole, leaving only me and my broken body to carry the memory. I packed my gear with numb hands and walked the long trail down. Each step was heavier than the last, as if the forest were trying to keep me. But eventually the trees thinned, the road appeared, and the sound of my truck's engine broke the silence at last. I didn't look back. The first thing I did when I reached the ranger station was slam the door behind me and lean against it like a hunted man. My chest heaved, sweat soaking through my shirt despite the cold mountain air. The walls felt too thin, the glass windows too fragile, yet they were barriers all the same, man-made, human. I dropped my gear and went straight for the radio set inside. My fingers fumbled over the knobs, static filling the room like a storm. Then, finally, a voice cracked through. A dispatcher, sharp, crisp, perfectly ordinary. The sound nearly broke me. My knees gave way and I sank to the floor, clutching the receiver like it was the last solid thing in the world. "Hayes? Do you copy?" I tried to answer, but my voice cracked into nothing. All I managed was a broken gasp, a sound closer to sobbing than speech. The dispatcher called my name again, steadier this time, grounding me. At last, words stumbled out, "I'm here." It took another hour before a truck arrived. Another ranger, Collins, a younger guy with a sunburnt face, stepped out. He grinned, casual, like this was just another pickup. But when he saw my eyes, his expression shifted. He didn't ask questions on the drive back. He didn't need to. Whatever was written on my face was enough. At headquarters, I filed my report, though I kept the words clipped and clinical. Unidentified noises, potential trespassers, evidence of large animal presence. I wrote it like a professional because that was what was expected. No mention of spirals, no mention of voices, no mention of golden eyes watching me from beyond the firelight. If I had written the truth, they would have called me unfit. They would have taken my badge, my post, maybe even my freedom. But inside I knew what I had seen, what I had felt. And once knowledge takes root, you can't scrub it away. The following weeks blurred together. I stayed busy with paperwork, maintenance, patrols, and safer stretches of forest. But every night as I lay in my bunk, the memories returned. The smell of fur and rot, the laughter echoing through the valley, the chant that rose from the ground itself. Worse than memory was expectation. Each night, I half expected to hear knocking on the cabin walls. Each morning, I checked the condensation on the windows for handprints. The forest didn't have to touch me anymore. It lived inside me now. I kept the tuft of hair I'd found in the cave. I shouldn't have. Protocol demanded samples be logged, but something stopped me from turning it in. It sat sealed in its plastic bag, buried at the bottom of my duffel. Sometimes, late at night, I swore I could smell it even through the plastic. Musky, rank, undeniable. One night, I dreamed of the cave, not as it had been, but larger, spiraling downward like a throat swallowing the world. The bones were stacked higher, forming walls, and in the center stood the figure, taller than before, its golden eyes burning. It raised a hand, palm open, and beckoned. My body moved forward without choice, my feet dragging across the bones, my hand rising to meet its. When our palms touched, I woke, choking, the taste of rot in my mouth. I sat upright, gasping in the dark, the dream clinging like cobwebs, and I realized something chilling. Part of me hadn't resisted. Part of me wanted to take its hand. The human mind clings to reason, to patterns, to the rules we've written for the natural world, but reason fractures under pressure. It shatters when confronted with something that doesn't care for our rules. That was what I learned in the Rockies. We are fragile creatures, bound to the illusion of control. The forest doesn't need to harm us directly. It only needs to show us how powerless we are. I stayed on duty another month, but something had shifted. My fellow rangers noticed the shadows under my eyes, the way I jumped at sudden noises. I told them it was exhaustion, poor sleep, too much coffee. None of them pressed further, but I saw the sideways glances, the silent judgment. Eventually, I requested leave. They granted it without hesitation. Burnout was common after all. I packed up my duffel, leaving behind the badge that once meant everything to me. It felt like setting down armor I no longer believed in. I drove east, away from the mountains, away from the smell of pine and wet earth. I told myself I was leaving it behind. But the truth followed me like a second shadow. Gas stations, motels, rest stops, they all felt temporary, fragile, as though the forest had stretched its roots beneath the highways. Even in cities surrounded by noise and light, I sometimes hear it. A knock, faint but deliberate, echoing through walls that shouldn't carry sound. Once, in a diner at dawn, I caught a reflection in the window. Two golden eyes staring back. When I turned, there was nothing. Just a couple of truckers sipping coffee, oblivious. I've thought about going back. More than once, I've sat behind the wheel, maps spread across the seat, tracing the ridges where I nearly lost myself. Some part of me feels unfinished, like I left a conversation halfway through, like the forest is still waiting for me to answer. But I don't go. Not yet. Because I know what's waiting in those caves. I know what breathes behind the spirals. And I know that once you give yourself fully, there's no return. What's worse is this. Sometimes, in the quietest hours, I wonder if I was chosen. Not hunted at random, but marked, as though the spirals carved into stone and bark were also carved into me, invisible but permanent. And if that's true, then leaving the mountains doesn't matter. The forest isn't a place, it's a presence, a watcher, a wait, and it will come for me again. I tell myself I left the Rockies behind, but the truth is they've never released me. A week alone in those mountains rewrote something in me that cannot be undone. Every time I close my eyes, I see the spirals. Every time I hear a knock, a door, a pipe, a branch tapping glass, I feel my chest seize. It's a reflex, like a soldier ducking at the crack of gunfire years after war has ended. Except my war was against something that didn't belong to our world, and I'm not sure it ever ended. The hardest part hasn't been the fear. Fear is simple. You can breathe through it, muscle past it, force your legs to keep walking. What lingers is doubt. Was what I saw flesh and blood? Was it spirit? Was it the mountain itself wearing a mask of fur and eyes to remind me who owns the land? If I can't answer, then what does that make me? A ranger who lost his grip, or a witness no one will ever believe? I keep thinking about the bones in the cave, the human ones. I tell myself they could have been old remains, lost hikers, victims of weather, nothing more. But deep down, I know better. They were arranged too carefully. They were part of something older, some ritual that I stumbled into. And if that's true, then I wasn't the first. I won't be the last. Sometimes I dream of others like me, rangers or hunters or wanderers who disappeared into the Rockies and never returned. I picture them wandering endless spirals carved into stone, their names whispered by that guttural voice until they forgot who they were. Maybe that's the real trap of the forest, not to kill you, but to erase you, to fold your memory into its own. In the months since, I've tried to bury myself in ordinary things. I work odd jobs, I mend fences, change oil, sweep motel floors. I sit in diners with coffee cooling between my hands, pretending I'm just another tired man. But the forest follows. I'll catch myself staring at knots in wood grain, and they'll twist into spirals when I blink. I'll smell pine needles and damp earth in the middle of a city street with no trees for miles. The hair sample still sits in my duffel. I've never opened it again. Part of me wants to send it to a lab to demand proof, to force the world to acknowledge what I saw. But another part of me fears what that proof would mean. If the tests come back inconclusive, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if I was mad. If they come back showing something new, something impossible, then I'll spend the rest of my life waiting for it to return. Either way, I lose. So I keep it sealed, a relic of my week in hell. There's a pattern I've noticed in myself. When the nights are quietest, when the world feels safe, I start to miss it. Not the fear, not the terror, but the clarity. Out there, every breath mattered. Every sound carried weight. My heartbeat was a drum counting down my survival. Life was reduced to its sharpest edges, and in some twisted way, that felt pure. Here, in the so-called safety of towns and highways, everything feels dulled, empty. And that's what scares me most of all, that I've been marked not only by fear, but by hunger, that something in me wants to return. Once I caught myself driving west with no destination. I told myself I was just wandering, clearing my head, but my tires ate miles of highway until the mountains rose on the horizon, jagged and snow-capped. My hands gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. At the last moment, I turned south, forcing the Rockies to fade in the rearview mirror. But my chest ached, like I'd betrayed some secret agreement. I wonder if that's part of its design. The spirals aren't just symbols, they're invitations. Once you see them, they take root. They pull you back, whispering that the only way to understand is to step deeper, to give yourself fully. I resisted. I left. But resistance doesn't feel permanent. I know I'll go back one day. Not because I want to, but because I won't be able to stop myself. Maybe it will be months from now, maybe years. Maybe I'll wake up one morning and find my boots already laced, my truck already pointed west, and when that day comes, I know I won't return. Still, there's a lesson I carry, and maybe that's why I'm telling this at all. Survival isn't about strength. It isn't about firepower or training or grit. Survival is about facing the limits of reason and still choosing to move. It's about acknowledging the fragility of your mind and refusing to let it shatter completely. Fear doesn't destroy you. Giving in to fear does. I lasted a week in those mountains because I let myself be afraid without surrendering. I endured because I kept walking, kept breathing, kept clawing for each next moment, even when the night pressed down and the voice called my name. That's the lesson the Rockies gave me, carved into me as deeply as those spirals in the stone. We survive by embracing the terror and carrying it with us, even when it never leaves. So if you ever find yourself alone in the backcountry, if the trees grow too still, if the silence weighs on you, if you hear knocking where no one should be, don't dismiss it. Don't rationalize it away. Respect it. Know that something older is watching. And whatever you do, don't answer when it calls your name. I've already answered once, and I know one day it will call me again. The wind tore across the ridge that night like it had teeth, ripping at my jacket and stinging my face until it felt raw. I remember thinking, as I pulled the fur collar closer and tightened my gloves, that the mountain wasn't just trying to scare me, it was testing me. My name is Daniel Harris. I'm 42 years old, and I've worked as a forest ranger in Montana's glacier country for most of my adult life. The winters here aren't for the faint of heart. They're long, merciless, and hungry in ways that only those who face them know. I wasn't born with a taste for danger, though I suppose I was raised to respect it. My father was a logger, my mother a schoolteacher. I grew up with the smell of pine in my hair, the taste of wood smoke in my lungs. By the time I was 18, I'd already seen neighbors lose themselves to avalanches, hunters vanish without a trace, and search parties return with nothing but broken snowshoes and questions nobody wanted to answer out loud. That's what life in these mountains teaches you, that nature doesn't owe you survival. When I joined the Ranger Service, I thought I was prepared. I thought discipline, maps, radios, and training could tame fear. But in the wild, rules are a fragile thing. Radios go silent, maps are swallowed by storms, and sometimes what you find out there isn't in any training manual. I learned this the hard way, during winters that dragged on so cold the lakes groaned like wounded animals under the ice. I'm telling you these stories because they shaped me, because they still follow me when I lie awake at night listening for sounds I pray never return. These are the rescues that almost broke me, the ones that carried me from confident protector to someone who knows just how thin the line is, between reason and madness in the wilderness. And though I live to tell them, each left a scar on my mind that no one but the forest will ever truly understand. The first time it happened, I was 31, January. The snow had come heavy that year, swallowing cabins and roads until all that was left of the world was a vast white emptiness and the groan of trees bending under the weight. The call came in just before dusk. A hiker, overdue by 3 days, last seen heading toward an old trapper's cabin near Granite Creek. I strapped on my pack, checked my flare, and set out with nothing but a compass and the last of the daylight bleeding red over the horizon. Granite Creek was one of those places we kept on the maps but rarely spoke of. The locals whispered about it. Hunters who heard howls that didn't belong to wolves, campers who woke to footsteps circling their tents, footprints too large to be human, pressed into thawing mud. I'd chalked it up to superstition. People need stories to explain why they're afraid. But by the time I reached the ridge above the creek, with the snow cutting sideways and visibility shrinking to a few yards, I felt that same irrational fear clawing its way into my chest. The trapper's cabin was there, crouched like an animal under the trees. Its roof bent, its windows blinded with frost. My boots crunched on something brittle as I approached. At first, I thought it was ice, until I knelt and saw it was a set of glasses, the frames cracked, lenses fogged with snow. They didn't belong to the missing man, at least not by description. My stomach tightened. I wanted to call it in, but the storm had already eaten my radio signal. I was alone with the decision. I pushed the door open. The hinges screamed. Inside, the air was thick, foul with the smell of old meat and something metallic, like blood on snow. My flashlight beam swept across the cabin, a cot with its blankets shredded, claw marks carved deep into the wood near the doorframe, and in the center of the floor, footprints. Bare, human-shaped, but larger than any boot I'd ever seen. They circled once, twice, then vanished toward the back wall where the boards had been torn away into darkness. I knew then the hiker was gone, maybe days gone, maybe worse. Still, I called out his name, my voice trembling as it bounced back at me from the ruined boards. The echo was wrong, warped, as if another voice had answered just half a second behind me. My throat went dry. I told myself it was the cabin, the way old wood warps sound. But I couldn't shake the feeling I wasn't alone. The storm pressed harder against the walls. Snow hissed through the cracks. I backed out slowly, retracing my steps, eyes locked on the torn boards as though something might crawl through any second. When I turned toward the trail, the world had changed. The snow had swallowed my tracks, the storm erasing every trace of how I'd come. My compass needle spun, useless. I could no longer tell where the ridge ended or where the forest began. Panic tried to grab hold, but fear is a dangerous master out there. It makes you run when you should stand still, shout when silence could save you. I forced my breath steady, clutched the compass anyway, and started walking downhill. It took me hours, stumbling, clawing through drifts, but I made it back to the ranger station by dawn, frostbitten and shaking. The missing hiker's body was found weeks later near a frozen creek bed 2 miles from the cabin. His face was pale as the snow, his hands stripped raw, his eyes wide open. The coroner said hypothermia. I never told them about the footprints in the cabin, or the echo that spoke with my voice. Some things you keep to yourself because saying them out loud makes them too real, but it was only the beginning. I wish I could say that after Granite Creek, I grew wiser, more cautious, more respectful of the silence that settles in the backcountry after dark. But the truth is, I pushed the memory down, buried it beneath paperwork and patrols, convincing myself it had been the storm, the cold, exhaustion, anything but what I had felt gnawing at me in that cabin. Rangers don't last long if they spook easy. You learn to rationalize, or you resign. The next winter came colder, sharper. By mid-December, the passes were closed, the lakes solid. It was the kind of season when even the elk avoided the valleys, when you could walk for days without hearing a bird. That's when we got word of a stranded family, 2 adults and a child, whose truck had broken down off an unmaintained forest road. They'd tried to wait it out, but when their emergency call hit our dispatch, they'd already been snowed in for 5 days. Supplies low, heat running out. I volunteered. Maybe part of me needed to prove Granite Creek hadn't broken me. Maybe part of me needed to face that same void again and win. I strapped on snowshoes, packed flares, food rations, a spare blanket, and hiked out before dawn with another ranger, Will Donovan. Will was a solid man, 10 years my junior, with a laugh that carried like firelight. He didn't believe in any of the backwoods stories. To him, a tree was a tree, a wolf was a wolf, and anything else was just nerves. We made it to the truck by dusk. Half buried, its windows iced over, it leaned in the ditch like it had given up. Inside, we found the family huddled together, pale and exhausted, their breaths shallow and slow. They were alive, but not for long. We got them wrapped in blankets, fed them warm broth, and radioed for snowcat support to haul them out. Relief washed through me as I looked at the child's eyes flicker open. For a moment, it felt like a victory, like the mountain had given us this one. But the snowcat was hours away. Too many hours. We had to keep them moving, breathing, awake. Will and I took turns pacing the road outside, Frau keeping an eye on the dark line of trees that loomed beyond the ditch. The night was moonless, the kind where the forest turns into a black wall. At some point between my rounds and Will's, we started hearing it. A knock, soft, deliberate, from somewhere just inside the tree line. 3 beats. A pause. 3 beats again. Will thought it was branches knocking in the wind, but the air was dead still. I told myself it might be a woodpecker, though no bird would be out in that freezing dark. The family heard it too. The child whimpered every time it came. I tried to laugh it off, make it small, but the rhythm followed us all night. Sometimes closer, sometimes farther, always in 3s. When the snowcat finally arrived near dawn, its floodlights tearing the night apart, the knocking stopped. The family was loaded in, safe, carried back to warmth. Will slapped me on the back, grinning through chapped lips. See? Just trees, he said. But when I turned for one last look at the ditch where the truck had been, I saw tracks in the snow along the tree line. Not boots, not hooves. Wide, deep impressions, spaced too far apart to belong to any human. They ran parallel to our patrol line, stopping every 20 or 30 feet, always in groups of 3. I didn't say a word. Some nights, when the wind is quiet enough, I still hear that knocking in the walls of my cabin. The 3rd rescue that winter nearly ended me. It was February, the coldest I can remember, when I was called to search for a missing skier. He'd gone off trail near Hidden Cave, a limestone maw in the cliffs that locals avoided even in summer. The cave was said to breathe, exhaling warm air some nights, sucking in cold mist on others. Hikers claimed to hear whispers at its mouth, like a crowd waiting in the dark. I didn't want the assignment, but a ranger doesn't choose. I strapped on crampons, clipped my headlamp to my hat, and followed the skier's last tracks into the gorge. They led straight to the cave. My breath smoked in front of me as I stepped inside. The walls closed around me, damp and glistening. My light barely touched the ceiling, where icicles hung like knives. The track stopped 20 feet in, just ended, as though the man had vanished mid-stride. I called his name, my voice bouncing back broken, scattered. Something about the way it echoed made my skin crawl. It sounded too many, as if a dozen voices had called out at once. I pressed deeper, telling myself he might be injured, lost, waiting. But the cave kept pulling me. The air grew warmer, wetter, carrying a smell I can't forget. Copper and earth, like fresh blood soaking into soil. My light flickered just once, but it was enough to catch a shadow shift against the rock. I froze. My mind scrambled for explanations. Stalactites, a trick of the beam, fatigue. But then it moved again, deliberate, unfolding from the wall like something that had been waiting. I turned, heart hammering, but the way out seemed farther than I remembered, the cave stretching longer, deeper. My boots slipped on slick rock as I stumbled back. The sound followed me, heavy steps, not rushed, not clumsy, but patient. Each one landing with a soft, wet thud. I didn't look back. I couldn't. By some mercy, I spilled out into the snow. The air outside burned my lungs, clean and sharp. When I glanced over my shoulder, the cave mouth gaped silent, black. No sign of movement. The skier's body was found weeks later, far downstream in a thawed patch of river ice. No one could explain how he'd gotten there from the cave. I never returned to Hidden Cave, not even in summer. You spend enough winters out here, and you stop asking whether you saw what you think you saw. Instead, you learn to live with the questions, to carry them like extra weight in your pack. You keep walking, keep rescuing, keep answering the calls, because it's your duty. But every time I step into the snow now, I wonder if the mountain remembers me. If the thing in the cave, the thing in the trees, the echo in the cabin, they're all pieces of the same darkness. And I wonder how many winters I have left before I stop coming back at all. By the time the fourth winter came, I carried my fear differently. I didn't push it down anymore, didn't try to disguise it as something else. I wore it like another layer beneath my uniform, a second skin no one could see. When new recruits asked me about Granite Creek or Hidden Cave, I kept my stories short, practical, stripped of the parts that haunted me. I gave them facts, not truths. Because if you spoke the truths, if you let them out into the air, they had a way of multiplying. That January, I was sent to track a group of snowmobilers overdue by 48 hours. 3 men, all locals, all familiar with the land. Their families swore they'd only planned a short ride. They should have been back before the storm, but the storm came anyway, rolling down the mountain like an avalanche of sky. I set out alone against protocol because all the other units were tied up in avalanche cleanups. The snow was waist-deep in places, and the cold cut so hard that my eyelashes froze together when I blinked. I followed the trail markers until they vanished under drifts, then pressed farther into valleys where the wind howled without rest. Hours in, I found the first snowmobile, half buried, empty. The engine cover had been ripped open, wires dangling like veins. I crouched, touched the edge. It was torn, not broken, torn by something strong, too strong for any of the men. The second snowmobile came half a mile later, crashed into a spruce. Its seat was shredded, foam scattered across the snow like feathers. I saw blood on the handlebar. Not much, but enough. I called their names, but only the wind answered. By the time I found the third snowmobile, night was pressing in. It lay on its side, track marks scattered around it like frantic circles. I thought maybe the men had stayed together, maybe taken shelter nearby. But when I checked, I saw only one set of prints. Barefoot. Enormous. The stride was too wide, too long. They led off into the trees, swallowed by the dark. I wanted to follow, I truly did, but every instinct in me screamed against it. The forest had gone too quiet, as if holding its breath. No wind, no branches creaking, no settling snow. Just silence so heavy it pressed against my ears. I backed away, slowly, marking the coordinates, promising myself I'd return with backup at first light. But when dawn came and I led the team back, the snowmobiles were gone. All 3. The crash site's empty, the blood wiped clean, no tracks, no prints. Just untouched snow, like nothing had ever been there. My report said the storm had shifted the drifts, buried the evidence. That's the official version. The families never got closure. 3 men vanished, 3 machines erased, and only I carried the memory of those barefoot prints pacing the tree line. To this day, I don't know if I did right by walking away. Maybe they were still alive out there. Maybe I abandoned them to something I couldn't face. That doubt eats at me, even now. The worst rescue came not long after. A call from a climber's wife. Her husband hadn't returned from an ascent near Bear Ridge. It was late February, the kind of cold where steel cracks, the kind where even breathing feels like swallowing knives. I strapped on crampons, clipped ropes, and set off alone again, though I knew I shouldn't. Some part of me had started craving these missions, like I needed to test myself against whatever waited out there. The ridge rose steep and merciless, jagged black teeth against the gray sky. Halfway up, I found the man's rope line trailing from a piton hammered into the rock. The line ended at a ledge 20 feet below. I rappelled down, calling his name. That's when I smelled it. Not blood this time, not earth. Smoke. Sweet, cloying, almost like burning pine needles mixed with rot. The scent was wrong for the open air, wrong for the season. I tightened my grip on the rope, scanning. The ledge was empty, but carved into the snow was a circle. Perfect, wide, pressed deep as though something heavy had knelt there. At its center lay the climber's pack, torn open, contents scattered, no footprints, no drag marks. Just the circle, like something had claimed the space and then vanished with him in its grasp. My chest seized with panic. I shouted his name, though my voice cracked. It bounced back strange, warped, like it had to travel too far before returning. My rope creaked. My lamp flickered. And then, from somewhere above me, a sound rolled down the rock. Low, guttural, halfway between a growl and a word. It said my name. Not shouted. Not mimicked. Spoken. I froze, pressed against the cliff face, praying I'd misheard. But it came again, closer this time, vibrating through the stone. Daniel. My stomach dropped. I fumbled with the rope, climbing faster than I ever had, hands burning despite the gloves. Every few feet the sound followed, echoing down the ridge. Always my name, always that terrible patience in its tone. When I reached the top, I ran. Not walked, not paced, but ran, stumbling through drifts live, lungs screaming, vision blurred with frost. I didn't stop until the station roof broke the horizon. The climber was never found. The circle in the snow gone by the time anyone else searched the ridge. My report cited avalanche risk, but I'll never forget the way the stone vibrated when that voice crawled through it, as though the mountain itself had leaned close to whisper me home. These stories, they build on each other. Layer by layer, winter by winter, they wore at me. I'd thought I was protector, rescuer, witness. But each mission left me less sure of where my duty ended and where the mountain's hunger began. Because here's the truth no one wants to admit. Sometimes the rescues aren't rescues at all. Sometimes they're invitations. The forest calling you deeper, the snow covering your tracks until you forget how to return. And each time I answered, I felt more certain that one day I'd be the one the mountain kept. By the fifth winter, I stopped pretending the mountains hadn't gotten inside me. It wasn't just the cold in my bones anymore. It was the weight of something I couldn't name, pressing at the edges of every patrol, every report, every step I took into the timber. I could still do the job, still talk to hikers, still laugh with the new rangers in the bunkhouse. But in the quiet moments when the snow fell so soft it erased the sound of my own boots, I felt watched. Not by animals, not by people, by the place itself. When the call came that January, I felt it before I heard it. The phone on the wall hadn't even rung yet, but my gut had already gone cold, as though my body recognized the pattern, the rhythm of bad news. A pair of college kids had gone missing near Ironjaw Pass. Their friends said they'd been drinking, dared each other to hike out to the old fire lookout that had been abandoned since the 70s. They never came back. Ironjaw was a place that had shadow even at noon. The lookout sat high on a granite slab, its stilts crooked, its windows shattered. Locals said the forest reclaimed the men who built it. Every ranger I'd known treated the place like a bad tooth, best left alone unless you had no choice. Still, I went. Because that was the job. Because some part of me wanted to see if my name would be whispered there too. The trail was half buried. Branches clawed at my pack as I climbed. By the time I reached the lookout, night had fallen, and the cabin loomed like a coffin on stilts, the wind moaning through its broken beams. I found the kids' prints near the stairs, 2 sets, weaving and unsteady. They led inside. I followed, flashlight sweeping across rotting boards and broken glass. The air smelled of mildew and something sweeter, like fruit left too long in the sun. My beam caught a torn jacket in the corner, a flask still half full. But no bodies, no blood. Then came the sound, not footsteps, not voices, knocking. Again, 3 beats, just like at the family's truck the year before. This time, though, it wasn't from the forest. It came from beneath the floorboards. I froze, every hair on my arm standing up. The knocking moved slow, deliberate, traveling beneath me from one side of the lookout to the other. My breath hitched. The boards vibrated under my boots. Something was down there. I backed toward the stairs, heart hammering, and that's when I heard the laugh. High, broken, drunken, one of the kids. It came from the dark beneath the cabin, warped, stretched, as if pulled through water. I shined my light through the gaps in the floor, but all I saw was blackness that seemed to drink the beam. I whispered his name. The laugh stopped. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then, from that same blackness, a new sound rose. My own voice. My voice echoing back the kid's name exactly the way I had just said it. I staggered back, slammed into the door frame, nearly lost my footing on the stairs. I didn't stop running until the trees swallowed the lookout hole behind me. I made it back at dawn, shaking, clothes soaked with sweat despite the cold. The kids were found weeks later, half a mile downriver, curled together in the snow as if they'd simply gone to sleep. Their friends swore they hadn't carried sleeping bags. The coroner called it exposure. I didn't argue, but I knew what I'd heard. After Ironjaw, the lines began to blur. Each call, each rescue felt less like a mission and more like a summons. Sometimes out on patrol, I'd catch myself listening for it. The knock, the laugh, the echo. I told myself I was alert, that I was ready. But the truth was darker. I was waiting. That spring, I dreamed of caves. Every night, the same dream. I'd wake inside a tunnel, walls slick and breathing, the smell of copper thick in the air. I'd walk deeper, hearing my name whispered from ahead until I reached a chamber lit by no fire, no sun, no lamp, just a glow from the stone itself. In the center lay all the missing I'd searched for, the hiker, the skier, the snowmobilers, the climber, the kids. Their eyes open, their mouths moving, all speaking at once, though no sound came. And above them, in the shadows of the ceiling, something moved, something vast. I never saw its face. But each morning when I woke, my hands were raw, nails cracked, as if I'd clawed at rock in my sleep. I stopped telling anyone. Who could I? Will was gone, transferred to Yellowstone. The new rangers didn't know me well enough to notice the change. I filed my reports, kept my routes, played the part of the reliable veteran. But inside, I was unraveling. Then came the call that finally broke me. A young ranger, just 22, had gone missing on patrol. She was bright, eager, still believing the woods could be tamed with enough maps and rules. She'd radioed once, just after sunset, her voice steady but strained. Something's out here with me. Then silence. They sent me to track her. Her footprints led into a gulch where the snow was deep enough to swallow a man whole. I followed them down, heart hammering, breath clouding in the air. The prints wove left, right, then stopped altogether at the mouth of a cave. Not Hidden Cave. Not Ironjaw. Another one, deeper, darker, with icicles like teeth hanging over its entrance. Inside, the air was warm, just like before. The smell was copper. The walls glistened. And then I heard it. Not her voice. Mine. Daniel. I stopped breathing. The sound came from ahead, but it was wrong, lower, stretched, as if spoken by something trying on my voice like a mask. Then another voice joined it. Hers. The young ranger, calling my name, pleading. I staggered forward, light trembling in my hand. The tunnel twisted, the echoes multiplying until I couldn't tell which voice was hers and which was mine. And then, from the dark ahead, I saw movement, a figure, small, hunched, hair tangled, skin pale. She lifted her head. It was her. Her eyes found me, wide, terrified. Her lips moved, but when the sound came, it wasn't hers. It was my own voice again, saying, "You shouldn't have come." The light flickered. The walls seemed to pulse. I stumbled back, ropes slipping through my hands. When I looked again, she was gone. The tunnel empty. I don't remember leaving the cave. I only remember waking outside in the snow, frost caked on my beard, my radio crackling with static. The search team found me hours later. They never found her. I told them the cave collapsed, that the tunnel was gone, buried by thaw. They believed me. Or maybe they wanted to. But I know the truth. The caves aren't places. They're mouths. And once they call your name, they don't stop. By the 6th winter, I'd stopped asking myself whether I believed in what I'd seen. Belief had nothing to do with it. The mountain didn't care if I believed. It only cared if I listened. And the problem was I couldn't stop listening anymore. Even in the station, With the radio hissing and the wood stove rattling, I'd hear it. Sometimes just a knock, 3 beats against the wall, slow and patient. Sometimes a voice from the bunk room, low and muffled, calling my name like someone waiting at the door. I stopped sleeping much. Every time I closed my eyes, the caves returned, the glowing stone, the chorus of the lost, the shape in the ceiling that shifted when I dared look up. I tried to bury myself in routine, paperwork, maintenance checks, fuel inventory, chain inspections, anything to keep my hands moving. But the calls kept coming, and with each one I felt the tether of the job slip further from duty and closer to something like compulsion. The call that year came from a logging road outside the park boundary, one we weren't even supposed to patrol anymore. A trucker had reported lights deep in the trees, moving where no road should be. He swore he saw them weaving in patterns, like lanterns swinging. At first, I told myself it was nothing, maybe poachers, maybe kids. But as soon as the dispatcher read it out, my stomach clenched. I knew the mountain was calling again. I didn't wait for backup. I grabbed my lamp, snowshoes, and rifle and headed out alone. The forest that night was wrong from the first step. The snow had fallen thick, but the trees carried no weight. Their branches sagged bare, needles glistening but untouched. My lamp caught shapes in the fog, trunks leaning at angles that bent too far, shadows curling like fingers. And then I saw the lights. At first I thought they were lanterns, round, warm glows swaying gently between the pines, but they were too steady, too measured, floating at chest height in a perfect line. I counted 6. They moved deeper as I approached, always just far enough to pull me on. I told myself to stop. Every instinct screamed at me. But the longer I watched, the more I felt pulled forward, as if the lights weren't ahead of me at all, but inside me, coaxing my legs to keep going. Eventually, the trees broke into a clearing. At its center stood a cabin I didn't recognize. Not marked on any map, not built by the service. Its roof sagged under rot, its chimney crumbled, but its windows glowed with those same 6 lights. I could see shadows moving inside, figures pacing, crossing each other. I should have turned back. I should have radioed it in. But my boots carried me forward. The door creaked open before I touched it. Inside, the air was warm, heavy with the smell of pine pitch and smoke. The lights weren't lanterns at all. They were faces. Faces of the lost. The skier, the snowmobilers, the climber, the kids, the young ranger. All of them standing in silence, eyes glowing faint gold, watching me, my throat locked, my light trembled. They didn't move toward me. They only stood, waiting. Then one of them opened his mouth. The skier. His lips cracked and stiff, but the voice that came out was mine. Daniel. The others joined one by one, each mouthing my name, each speaking in my voice, until the cabin shook with it. The floorboards rattled. The walls pulsed. My chest seized as if my own lungs were pulling in too much air, too fast. I stumbled back, slammed against the open door. The cold rushed in, sharp and clean, snapping me free. The figures didn't follow. They only stood, still glowing, still speaking my name as I ran into the night. When I looked back from the tree line, the cabin was gone. The clearing empty. No tracks in the snow but mine. After that, the voices stopped waiting for the wilderness. They came with me. In the bunkhouse, I'd hear them whispering from the shower drain. On patrol, they echoed from frozen creeks. In the mess hall, I'd hear the knock under the table, always 3 beats. The other rangers started noticing. They didn't say much, but I caught the glances. The way they stiffened when I entered, the way conversations quieted. One night, I woke to find Will's replacement, some rookie whose name I can't even recall, standing in my doorway, pale and wide-eyed. He swore he'd heard me walking the halls, calling his name. But I hadn't left my bunk. That was the night I realized it wasn't just me anymore. The mountain had found a way to reach beyond me. And that terrified me more than anything, because if it could use my voice, it could spread. I tried to resign that spring. Sat in the supervisor's office, papers in hand, ready to walk away. But before I could sign, the phone rang. Another call, another rescue, another missing hiker in the high pass, and I knew with a bone-deep certainty that if I left now, I'd be next. So I stayed, not out of duty, not out of loyalty, out of fear. Because the mountain doesn't just take the lost, it takes the ones who run. And deep down, I think it's only waiting for the winter when I can't resist anymore. By the seventh winter, resistance felt pointless. It wasn't just that the voices followed me anymore. It was that they had grown familiar, like neighbors you don't want but learn to live beside. I'd catch them humming under the wind, soft, almost gentle, weaving through the hiss of the stove. Sometimes in the quiet between patrols, I'd hear my own words repeated back, something I'd said days earlier, laughed off in the mess hall, muttered to myself while tightening snow chains, always whispered back in my tone, but slower, patient, as if testing the sound. It should have broken me. But there was a strange comfort to it, like I was never alone out there in the timber in the endless white. For the first time, the mountain didn't just terrify me. It almost felt like it wanted me close. That winter, we had the worst blizzard in a decade. 3 feet fell in 2 days, roads impassable, power out across half the county, calls piled up, stranded motorists, downed cabins, hikers unaccounted for. And when the dispatcher said there was a signal flare sighted near Raven's Notch, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my pack and went over to the team. The Notch was a place I hated. A canyon cut deep between basalt cliffs, so narrow that sound never quite escaped. Radios always crackled there, compasses spun, and even in daylight the shadows never left. I snowshoed in, under a sky that bent low and heavy. The flare had been red, they said, arcing up once then fading. I told myself it was some hiker with one left in his kit, desperate for rescue. But deep down I already knew who had lit it. The farther I went, the quieter it grew. My steps softened. My breath seemed swallowed before it left my mouth. Even the creak of my gear dulled until it was like I was walking underwater. And then I saw it. The flare. Flare. Still burning. Stuck upright in the snow ahead, its red smoke curling upward but never dispersing, as though the air refused to carry it away. Beside it sat a figure, curled, knees to chest, head down, a ranger's parka. My chest tightened. It was her, the young ranger we'd lost the winter before, the one I'd followed into the cave. Her hood was pulled low, hair spilling out in frozen strands. She didn't move, didn't shiver, though the snow fell thick around her. I staggered forward, heart slamming. "It's me," I whispered. "I've got you." She lifted her head, and when she did, it wasn't her face. It was mine. Frost clung to its beard, its lips cracked and raw. Its eyes were hollow, but unmistakably my own. It smiled. "It's Daniel," it said in my voice. Not an echo, not a whisper. Perfect. Whole. I stumbled back, nearly falling. The flare hissed, spitting sparks. My double rose slowly, joints stiff, snow sliding from its shoulders. It stepped toward me, moving with the same rhythm I knew from my own bones. I ran. God help me. I ran like I never had, stumbling through drifts, lungs tearing, heart roaring in my ears. The notch walls pressed close, shadows chasing me. Behind me I heard my name again, shouted this time, the exact pitch of my own panic. When I finally burst into the open, the storm had lifted, the sky clear, the stars sharp as glass. I collapsed in the snow, chest heaving, throat raw. When I looked back, there was nothing. No flare, no figure, no tracks but mine. I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't. But from that night on, something changed. The voices no longer waited in caves or cabins or ridges. They came with me everywhere. In the reflection of the window, I'd see lips move that weren't mine. In the shine of the kettle, I'd catch my own eyes blink a fraction too late. I wasn't being hunted anymore. I was being mirrored. And the worst part? It didn't feel like an invasion. It felt like an invitation. I started dreaming of walking into the snow without a pack, without a radio, without leaving word, just me and the mountain, finally face to face. No more rescues, no more searching, just surrender. But there was still one part of me that clung to duty. That old, stubborn ranger's oath, and it was that part that kept me tethered when the final call came. A family of 3 reported missing on a shortcut road near Black Elk Ridge. A father, a mother, a daughter. Their car had been found abandoned, doors open, tracks leading off into the timber. Another storm was rolling in, and if I didn't go then, they'd be gone for good. I went. The tracks were easy to follow. Small prints weaving through the drifts, the father's stride broken by dragging. I pushed through the trees deeper, farther, until the forest opened into a hollow I'd never seen marked on any map. At its center stood a cabin. The same cabin, the one with the glowing faces. Smoke curled from its chimney now, and in the windows shadows moved. I stopped, breath shallow, body trembling. Everything in me screamed to turn back. But then I heard it. Faint, fragile, human. A girl's voice calling for help. And that was enough. My duty, my oath, the thing I'd clung to, it pulled me forward. I crossed the hollow, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The warmth hit me like a wave. The family sat at the table, alive, huddled close. Their eyes lit when they saw me. Relief flooded me so strong it almost broke me. But then I looked past them, and in the far corner, standing in the shadows, was myself, smiling. At first, I thought the storm and exhaustion had broken me, that I was seeing a trick of light, some fevered shadow that happened to wear my face. But as the family clutched each other tighter, eyes darting between me and the figure in the corner, I realized they saw it too. It was me. Same parka, same beard, same tired, hollow stare. Only the smile was wrong. It wasn't joy, wasn't relief. It was patient, hungry. The air inside the cabin thickened. The smoke from the stove clung low, refusing to rise, curling around my boots. The family whispered prayers under their breath, voices shaking, but the other me didn't move. It just watched, lips curling wider. "Daniel," it said. My voice, perfectly pitched, but deeper somehow, like it had been pushed through the belly of the mountain. I raised my lamp. Its glow hit the figure and bent, like light bending through water. Its edges rippled, blurred, but the face stayed clear, too clear. Every scar, every wrinkle, every line I'd memorized in mirrors. The daughter cried out. The sound broke whatever paralysis held me. I grabbed her arm, pulled her to her feet. "We're leaving," I barked, louder than I intended. My voice cracked. The other me tilted its head, amused. It didn't block the door. It didn't rush us. It only stepped forward, slow, deliberate, each bootfall echoing too loud for the space. The floor trembled. The stove rattled. I yanked the family toward the doorway. The father stumbled, weak from cold, but I dragged him up by his coat. The mother clung to the girl's hand like it was the only rope holding her above drowning water. Behind us, the thing moved faster now. Its boots hit in sync with mine, matching my stride perfectly. When I turned my head, I saw its mouth moving. Words came, but not to me, straight into the family's ears. Their faces twisted, fear shifting to something else. "Doubt. Don't listen," I shouted. "Don't." The father jerked free. He turned, staring back into the cabin as though mesmerized. His lips moved. He said my name. Not to me. To it. I pulled harder, dragging the mother and daughter through the doorway. The father hesitated on the threshold, torn like as though a rope pulled him both directions. The other me raised a hand, palm open, beckoning. For a moment I thought we'd lost him. Then the wind screamed. The cabin door slammed, nearly tearing off its hinges. Snow blasted into the room, a white wall cutting us apart. I stumbled, shielded the girl, tried to hold my grip on her mother's sleeve. But when the gust passed, they were gone. So was the cabin. I was on my knees in an empty hollow, the storm raging. The family vanished as though erased. My lamp flickered and died. The snow howled, drowning every sound. And then, from behind me, a whisper. "You brought them home." I spun, rifle raised, but there was nothing, only my own footprints circling me as though I'd been walking in loops for hours. The storm swallowed everything. When the search team found me 3 days later, half frozen against a tree, I was alone. No sign of the family, no cabin, no tracks, but mine. They said I'd been delirious, frostbitten, lucky to be alive, but I know what I saw. I know what I followed. And the worst part, the part that gnaws me every night since, is this. For the first time, I didn't feel like a rescuer. I felt like bait, like the mountain had used me, like it always had, drawing others in with my face, my voice, my oath. And when I close my eyes now, when the wind rattles the shutters and the stove hums low, I see it, me, standing in the corner of the room, patient, smiling, waiting for the day I finally stop running and step toward it. Because Maybe I've never been rescuing anyone at all. Maybe I've only been delivering them. I don't mark time in seasons anymore. The years blur together, one winter folding into the next until the snow feels permanent, as though summer was only a dream I once had and forgot the details of. The others say I've been here too long, that it's time to hang up the badge, move down to the flatlands, find someplace warm. But what they don't understand is this: the mountain won't let me go. This winter proved it. The voices no longer wait for me in caves, in cabins, in storm-choked passes. They've moved closer, intimate now, coiled in the small places of my life. In the steam off my coffee, I hear the murmur of names. In the frost that creeps across my window, faces ripple just beneath the surface, faint but undeniable. And when I shave in the cracked mirror above the station sink, sometimes the reflection doesn't move when I do. At first, it was subtle. A blink out of rhythm, a twitch of the mouth delayed. Then it grew bolder. One morning, I watched my reflection smile as I stared at it, stone-faced, razor trembling in my hand. I didn't shave that day. But the true breaking point came during a rescue in January. A solo hiker reported overdue on Black Elk Ridge when his car was found at the trailhead, engine cold, no sign of him. I went alone, though I told the others I had backup en route. Something in me knew this would not be a mission I could share. The ridge was buried, the trail obliterated. My compass spun as usual, but I pressed on, tracking faint depressions in the snow that looked more like suggestions than footprints. The higher I climbed, the heavier the silence grew, until the only sound was the pound of my blood in my ears. And then I saw him, a man hunched against the wind, coat torn, face pale with frostbite. He lifted his head slowly when I called, eyes glassy, lips cracked. Relief hit me like fire. I'd found him. I reached out, but he recoiled, eyes widening, horror breaking through the frost. He whispered, voice raw, "No, you're already here." I froze. "What do you mean?" He raised a shaking hand and pointed past me. I turned and saw myself standing in the snow. No lamp, no rifle, no pack, just me, arms at my sides, watching. The hiker screamed. His voice was ripped away by the wind, but his terror was pure. He stumbled backward, lost his footing, and before I could move, he slid over the ridge, swallowed by the white void below. Gone. I stood paralyzed between the empty drop and my double, heart pounding so loud it hurt. The figure didn't move, didn't need to. Its smile said everything. It wasn't just taking the lost anymore. It was taking those who looked at me. I stumbled down the ridge half blind, every tree trunk a watcher, every gust of snow a whisper in my voice. When I made it back to the station, the others asked about the hiker. I lied, said I'd found nothing, that maybe he'd taken another trail. They searched for days, but of course they never found him. The truth stayed locked behind my teeth, rotting me from the inside. Now every night I hear the knocking, not outside anymore. Not in the bunkhouse walls or the floorboards of some ruined lookout. Inside me, 3 beats, steady, patient, like a second heart behind my ribs. I don't know how long I can keep it from breaking through. Last night I woke to find myself standing at the door, boots on, parka zipped, rifle slung across my shoulder. I hadn't dressed, I hadn't moved, and yet there I was, hand on the knob, ready to step into the blizzard. The wind howled my name. My own voice howled back. I sat down hard, pressed my head against my knees, begged myself not to listen. I stayed like that until dawn. But the truth is, it's only a matter of time. Because the mountain doesn't need to chase me anymore. It lives in me now. And when the next knock comes, when the reflection in the mirror finally steps forward instead of waiting, when the voices no longer whisper but speak plain and clear, I don't think I'll resist. I think I'll open the door. And the last thing anyone will hear is my voice, calling them into the snow. I don't really have an explanation for what happened. I have ideas, but here's the story. I'm a freshly graduated high school student on my way to college during my senior year. I had a job working for my grandfather as a farm manager. He would give me instructions on what to do in the farm, without him being there most commonly feeding the cows. It was early November, and at this time, baseball practices started after school and would last from 3:25 to 5:30. By that time, The sun was almost down when I arrived at work and started getting ready one day. I had gotten dressed, filled up the buckets, and fed the first farm when I realized that I didn't have a key to the other farm. Frustrated, I was forced to pick up 2 buckets at a time and walk them from the fence to the feed trough, a good 40-yard walk. While walking, I was trying to keep myself upbeat and just started to whistle Noriel pattern or tune, just something that I came up with when I came back and put the last buckets in the bed of the truck. I heard something from my neighboring property. It was whistling, strange whistling. It hot as noon lives anywhere near the T property, and it sounded very close. I rationalized it was a mockingbird or something and just kind of went in with my life. The next couple of days, I didn't whistle, but the whistling continued slowly over those few days. It got clearer and clearer until it sounded like regular whistling. Eventually, it got louder. When I first yarded, it was very faint, almost missed it. Over the crunching of me walking to my truck in the last few days, I kind of became accustomed to the whistling and kind of expected it when one day it didn't come. I was a little disappointed this time. I had brr out the key and walked up to the gate and started fiddling with my keys when I dropped them into the grass. I said, damn it, when I dropped them, I squatted down and started to search for them. When I heard Davery faint sound coming from the other property, a loud groan or glee, and it was getting louder at this point. I wasn't scared, but more curious as to what was going on over there. I left my truck parked across from the property and walked a few feet down the road, hopping the fence of the property where I heard the sounds. The land in there goes straight up hill-andish, heavily woo. Deadle, throughout the further you go up, the more dense it gets looking back. Now, I made a few big mistakes that could have gotten me hurt. As I walked up the hill, I would occasionally hear the gurgle. It was far up the hills, still as faint as it was before. As I walked, a bad smell started to hit my nose, a weird mixture of garbage and wet dog or something. I heard something as I was about to crest the hill. Damn it, a very dry low and quite distorted damn it came from a couple of yards in front of me. It sounded like a 60-year-old smoker saying damn it very slowly as if they didn't know Wenglish or something. I automatically thought someone was on our property, somewhat angry and paranoid. Now it started to move slower. I didn't want this guy to hear me before I could see them. I kept going and stopped and listened when I heard another sound. Damn it, damn it. This guy was now slowly saying damn it, normally not long and drawn out in that eerie way as if he didn't know English. Down on this log, kind of listening, trying to figure out what I should do about this person. He kept saying it over, and I noticed his tone was getting higher, his inflection, and ninwa shanging at it, this guy was perfectly mimicking my tone inflection. Literally everything, he even mimicked my frustration when I said it, angry and kind of scared. Now I got up and started to crest the hill. It flicked on my flashlight on my phone, hey, this is private property. I began, but I was cut off in my sentence as I came over the hill. The light barely illuminated the snaked figures, squatting just a couple of yards in front of me. His eyes were illuminated by the faint glow of my flashlight. I automatically felt that something was wrong. This wasn't regular purse. On his neck was longer than normal, and when I came up the hill, he winched his neck and snapped his head to look at me without moving his eyes. They were too big, and his head was large and slender. He was squatted in a ballerina type squat. I looked at this body. He was very skinny, his ribs showing through his skin. There was a short silence, and like a robot, the man turned in the leaves and slowly stood with his hands next to his side. I was debating if it was even a person. It was far too to be a person. Damn it said in my voice. It turned and sprinted down the hill. Didn't feel like. I was running, but more that my legs were just going through the motions. I didn't look back before. I got to the fence, and when I hopped it, I got in my truck and sped away. Sadly, I still work at that farm, but I've never told anyone the story, note from my grandfather. I've only heard the whistling a few more times since then. I'm not really a believer in the paranormal, and I really tried to find an explanation for weird stuff. I believe that this may have just been some weird squatter, but I really don't know. Sitting on the western side of the Missouri River is Omaha, Nebraska, a sprawling metropolis that has been the largest city in Nebraska for nearly 170 years. It has seen its share of historical events and boasted a rich tapestry of ethnic neighborhoods where waves of immigrants found a home among their own kind. South Omaha District, famous for its meatpacking plants, welcomed Eastern Europeans, including Poles, Czechs, Germans, Lithuanians, Slavic Croatians, and more. As time passed, many of the slaughterhouses closed, forever altering the landscape growing up in Omaha. I often heard tales of South Omaha's past, and the old buildings that remained aslant monuments to those days fascinated me. I long to explore these relics of history from old slaughterhouses to factories and even breweries that once made Omaha famous. However, one particular building had captured my imagination, the massive 5-story slaughterhouse nestled close to the train tracks that sliced through South Omaha. Constructed of brick and steel, it's to a testament to the city's industrial history. News of its impending demolition filled me with sadness, but it also spurred my curiosity. While I had always been intrigued by urban exploration, I'd been too nervous to trespass in the past, but with the slaughterhouses slated for destruction, I made a decision. I had to see it before it became just another parking lot. One fantastic fall evening, I parked my truck at a distance from the building, armed with a heavy LED mag light, and dreaded inconspicuously in light-taking gear. I approached the massive structure. The slaughterhouse lay near the train tracks, surrounded by other buildings, with the same red and white brick facade. Tall grasses and empty lots bordered the site, enclosed by a chain-link fence that encompassed the entire complex. I was prepared for this moment and parked my truck discreetly on a side street near a garage as near the fence, a strange sensation crept over my nervousness and fear, a cocktail of emotions that refused to dissipate. Nevertheless, I pressed on, and as I stepped over the fence, the unease intensified. I reached a door on the side of the building, its logo and name long faded, the glass coated in dirt and grime. I tried e-handle buted, wouldn't budge. With some force, managed to pry it open, breaking the lock in the process. Is shrugged it off, knowing the building was destined for demolition inside. Is switched on my flashlight, revealing a vast pitch-black room filled with decaying machinery used for meat processing. Dust and cobwebs clung to everything, and control stations, desks, and more lay untouched for years. Undeterred, I navigated through the machinery until I reached a pair of double doors leading to another room. As I pushed the doors open, slightly a sudden chill descended up. On might was a natural cold, given that the outside temperature was a mild 65 degrees Fahrenheit. My skin prickled, and a sense of foreboding washed over. Mether was now in, but it felt like winter had encroached upon this room. I steeled myself and ventured forward, entering what I presumed to be the killing floor. It featured a main pathway for cattle and conveyor belts to transport them to the next processing station. Yet the smell that assailed my senses was unlike anything I had ever encountered in this part of town. It was a foul odor of death, decay, and disease ascent from the D. Soft nightmares, the hairs on my neck stood on end, and I recalled stories of such putrid stenches being associated with Wendigos and skinwalkers. I tried to convince myself that it was merely a decaying animal, but the unease lingered. My journey through the next room wasn't seen, and then a sound like neither shattered the silence, another otherworldly bellow that reverberated with an eerie, almost human-like cry. I scanned the room, searching for the source of the wailing, but found nothing. Panic began to set in as I moved to the next room, my nerves stretched to the limb. There my flashlight revealed a gruesome sight, large plastic bins filled with bloody cow bones. How could they still be here after nearly 4 decades of abandonment? I took a step back, realizing that the floor was also coated in fresh blood. My heart pounded, and I was about to make my escape when I saw a faint tread light emanating from a nearby doorway. 2 crimson eyes appeared in the darkness, and I leaned closer to discern their source. Then another deafening bellow, closer this time, accompanied by the sound of hooves on tile sent me sprinting through the door to the other side of the room. Once through the door, I raced down a hallway lined with shiny tile, shopping to find an exit. The footsteps of the Unsu echoed behind me, but the gear they wore seemed to slow them down, allowing me to gain some distance. At last, I reached the end of the hallway and pushed through a doorway with rubber flaps like those in a butcher shop. It turned to the but froze in my tracks. A dim red light bulb illuminated a workstation where multiple men in long white Smelmets goggles and rubber boots were cleaning a cow carcass unsprayed it do. And another cut it apart, and the third moved bones into a bin. It was an impossible sight. Meatpacking in this abandoned place, it couldn't be. As I inched further into the room, I heard them speaking an unfamiliar language, Eastern European, perhaps Polish. My heart raced as memories of my grandparents speaking Polish flashed before me. I needed to get past them to escape, so I carefully maneuvered around them, and I don't know how, but they heard me. All 3 stopped what they were doing and turned to face me, their bespectacled faces illuminated by the dim red light. It felt like a trespasser in a forbidden world. A son of them shouted something in Polish and began moving toward me. The others followed suit, their intent clear. Panic seized me, and I'd shed for the other doors, printing down the hallway once more. I could hear their footsteps closing in behind me, but their cumbersome gear seemed to hinder their pursuit. If Finale found an exterior door and burst through it, emerging on the opposite side of the slaughterhouse, gasping for breath, I surveyed my surroundings, my newfound freedom, allowing me to regain some composure. I glanced back at Thiemann Acing building and froze through an open truck dock as all the three men gained their faces unchanged, but now with glowing reed eyes, fears surged through me's. I sprinted to my truck up the road, another bone-chilling bellow echoed in the distance, and my ears throbbed with the sound. How could this be happening? I sped away from the nightmare, my mind racing with questions. What did those men want with me? What had I stumbled upon in that place? I had no answers, only a killing encounter that would haunt me forever after extensive research and countless hours of reading about the supernatural. I couldn't help but wonder if I had encountered some kind of malevolent entity, perhaps a skinwalker. The truth remained shrouded in mystery, and I vowed never to venture into abandoned buildings, especially those with a dark and eerie past. The layout of the cabin we were staying in outside was quite unique. It had a deck that wrapped around the house in axe shape, creating a cozy, welcoming atmosphere. The main entrance, the south, providing a stunning view of the surrounding landscape, while these coned entrance faced west, overlooking a peaceful meadow. The stairs leading down from the west side, where the meadows stretched out, consisted of 15 steps, each roughly 10 thigh. As you approached the cabin from the south, you couldn't help but notice the big panel glass windows that adorned the west side. These windows connected two smaller windows, allowing ample natural light to filter into the cabin. Screen doors to directly underneath this arrangement. It was a year after my mom and her boyfriend had gone on a cruise, leaving me and his parents, Mary and Ben, with Kenny, his brother, also joining us for the cabin trip. Despite my lingering unease from a previous encounter, I decided to push my apprehensions to the back of my mind, deem a previous story. I had shared my initial encounter with what I believed might have been a skinwalker, and that Experi also made me wary of returning to the cabin's treehouse. However, with noon ills to accompany, my youthful curiosity led me to wander around the property one day. I stood near the front of the cabin, gazing toward the treehouse. The memory of my past encounter sent a shiver down my spine, and an inexplicable feeling of being watched was hid over me. I couldn't shake it off. I stared at the treehouse, fearing the worst, and then to my horror, it suddenly collapsed to one side. I couldn't stay outside any longer, so I sprinted back indoors. The rest of the day passed somewhat Formally, I watched a movie, Ada did the dishes, and even caught a college football game on TV. Exhausted, I eventually fell asleep on the couch, but was rudely awakened sometime around midnight by a fierce storm. Lightning flashed and thunder roared outside, startling me from my slumber. I rubbed my eyes and with a sense of trepidation made my way up the stairs to my bedroom. The bed I lay on was situated right at the edge of the open area upstairs, and I could shake the feeling of unease as something was definitely peering in at me, and I could feel it deep in my bones. Ned my gazette toward the panel glass windows as another lightning strike illuminated the night. There pressed against the glass a massive, grotesque creature. My body went cold, and I instantly recognized it as the same creature that had watched me earlier in the evening. It seemed to know I was there. Panicking, I bolted from my bed and fled into the kitchen. I huddled behind the bar-like table against the countertop, my heart pounding with terror. The tapping on the window grew more frequent, and I couldn't bear to look. I closed my eyes, curling up into a fetal position. On the floor above me, the kitchen sink had a small window, and when I eventually opened my eyes, the creature was staring back at me's face, was horrifyingly human-like, with pitch black eyes, damp hair from the rain, a flat nose, and a mouth reminiscent of a gorilla. I couldn't tear my gaze away, frozen in terror with tears streaming down my face. It finally managed to shift my head so that I couldn't see it anymore. At that moment, I heard the creature walk over to the door and start rattling it desperately, trying to gain entry. Just when it thought I was beyond hope, Kenny walk. A daughter of a room heading towards the bathroom had turned around and found me on the kitchen floor, trembling like a frightened animal. Hesked, "What are you doing?" But I couldn't even form a coherent response. Fear had taken complete control of Mizoon. Mary joined us, probably awakened by the commotion. Together, they managed to calm me down, and they let me sleep in their third bedroom that night. The next day, we hastily packed our things and left the cabin behind. When my parents returned from their vacation, Mary and Ben shared the unsettling events of that night with them. Imo asked me about everything that had transpired from the moment I first felt uneasy to the terrifying encounter by the window. I couldn't shake the memory of that creature and I knew I could never return to those mountains without feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. I contemplated what I had seen. I couldn't help but wonder, was it some sort of Sasquatch, a Wendigo, or perhaps even a skinwalker? I may never know for sure, but the haunting memories of that night in the cabin would stay with me, forever etched in my mind. I still get chills down my spine when I reminisce about that harrowing summer night 3 years ago. I was just an innocent 11-year-old full of youthful excitement, attending a summer camp with my classmates. The camp was an absolute delight. We frolicked in the sun and relished the camaraderie. Little did we know that our tranquil world was about to be shattered. It was a moonlit night when it all began, and our cozy shelter in the woods echoed with the sinister symphony of footsteps. The eerie sound pierced my slumber, jolting me awake. Fear gripped my heart, paralyzing me. I lay there, petrified, stange, to discern the source of the ominous noise. Each step reverberated through the shelter, etching dread into my very soul. Time seemed to stretch endlessly until footsteps finally faded into the obscurity of the night. Only then did I gather the courage to venture a glimpse outside. My heart pounded as I peered through the flimsy veil of darkness. There, right before our shelter, stood a shadowy figure. My skin prickled with goosebumps. An antsy shiver traversed my spine. Panicked, I roused my slumbering friends from their dreams, desperate to prove I wasn't hallucinating. I gestured wildly towards the figure outside, but when their sleepy eyes blinked open and they turned to look, the figure had vanished, leaving behind an unsettling void. The following day brought with it the bright distraction of daytime activities, and the nocturnal scareways temporarily shelled in the recesses of our minds. Engaged in a thrilling excursion with a group of rangers, my friends and I ventured into the dense wilderness. Our enthusiasm was palpable as we anticipated close encounters with wildle, and breathtaking sights. However, what we encountered was far from the anticipated adventure. Amidst the whispering leaves and dappled sunlight, a solitary man materialized on our path. Beckoned us to approach. His intentions, shrouded in mystery, skepticism coursed through my veins, but one of my comp companions argued it would be impolite to ignore him, suggesting he might need our assistance. I, on the other hand, sensed danger, and my instincts screamed at met or retreat. I began to backtrack towards the reassuring presence of the rangers, planning to share our unnerving encounter, but I'm betrayed. Me's my friends debate whether to heed the stranger's call. He decided for us with an unsettling grin stretching across his face. The man approached us and uttered chilling words. "She boys, I want to have some." My response was immediate, resolute. "Noth, thanks, we have to go back to the rangers." Miraculously, he acquiesced and allowed us to leave, sparing us from whatever malevolent scheme he had in mind that night. The relentless sound of footsteps returned. Determined to torment, sans more this time, I was ready. I roused my friend, Dia, cautiously peering outside to determine to unveil the identity of our nocturnal visitor, and there stood the same ominous man from the afternoon encounter. My heart pounded like a drum's. A locked eyes with him, his features illuminated by the faint moonlight. How did he know where we were staying? Panic gripped us as my friend hurled awful threat, a promise of violence to protect you. In response, the man brandished a massive gleaming knife, glinting malevolently in the night. It was our only saving grace, for the sight of the weapon sent him fleeing into the obscurity. Once more, the following day, we wasted no time reporting the horrifying encounter to the rangers, shopping for their intervention. But the man vanished into the ether, never to be heard from again. The unsettling encounter remained etched in my memory, a haunting enigma that would forever haunt my thoughts, leaving me with the lingering question of what that sinister stranger truly wanted with a group of innocent children. The morning sun peeked over the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over our small suburban home. I stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the neighborhood wake up. Today was the day we'd been planning for months, our family camping trip to the secluded woods up north. I couldn't but feel a mix of excitement and apprehension. Joyce was bustling around in the kitchen, her movements efficient and full of purpose. Tyler, our adventurous 12-year-old, was already outside double-checking our camping gear with the seriousness of a seasoned explorer. Amethy, youngest Atnan, was buzzing with energy, her laughter filling the house. As she chased Dor-old dog, Buster around the living room. As a family when needed, this work had been relentless for Joyce and me, and the kids were growing up fast, caught in their own whirlwinds of school and friends. This trip was our chance to disconnect from the world and reconnect with each other. Packing the camper was like a well-rehearsed dance, well knew our roles. Joyce's meticulous planning ensured we had everything from spare batteries to her famous homemade granola bars. Tile. Revert, the helper, was in charge of the camping gear, while Amy took it upon herself to make sure Buster had his favorite chew-to. Is supervised making sure everything was secured and ready for the 4-hour drive. The drive was peaceful, open roads, clear skis, and a playlist of classic rock set the ton. Joyce and I talked about everything and nothing while the kids played games in the back seat. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of Amy's face pressed against the window where yes wide, with wonder at the passing scenery, where-rived at the campground in the mid-afternoon. On it, was as beautiful as remembered a pristine laker reflecting the clear blue sky surrounded by dense woods. That promised adventure, we found our campsite, a cozy spot near the lake, and got to work setting up. Tyler and Amy were a blur of excitement, helping us set up the camper and then immediately setting off on their bikes to explore the nearby trails. Joyce and I worked together in comfortable silence, our routine seamless after years of camping together once everything was in place. It took charge of the grill, cooking up a batch of burgers that had everyone's mouth, watering the familiar smell of grilled meat and the sound of sizzling fat were comforting. We gathered around the picnic table, enjoying our meal under the shade of tall pine trees. As the sun began to set, well at a campfire, the crackling flames and the soft glow against the darkening sky created a magical atmosphere. We roasted marshmallows, shared stories, and laughed together. It was these moments, simple and unadorned, that I cherished the most. The night grew darker and the woods around us came alive with the sounds of nature. The hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves, int Hebraisite was peaceful, yet there was an undercurrent of something wild, something untamed, just beyond the reach of our campfire light. As the kids started to yawn, worn out from the day's adventures, we tucked them in to bend the camper. Joyce lingered by the fire, talking softly, enjoying the quiet. Eventually, we too decided to call it a night. As I lay in bed, listening to the gentle breathing of my family, it felt a profound sense of contentment, out air away from the noise and rush of everyday life. It felt grounded, little did I know our tranquil retreat was about to turn into the unknown, into a night that would test using ways. Whenever imagined the chirping of birds outside our camper, ushered in a new day full of promise and the allure of the unknown. After a quick breakfast of scrambled eggs and two east, set out to explore the dense woods that surrounded the campground. There's something about being in nature, the way it strips away the complexities of life, leaving you with a raw sense of existence. That's what I wanted for my family, a touch of raw, unfiltered life. Tyler led the way with the confidence of a young boy who believed Wace invincible, his sister trailing behind her, eyes wide with curiosity. Joyce walked beside me, her hand occasionally brushing mine, a silent communication of shared love and contentment. We followed a well-worn trail that meandered through the forest. The canopy of leaves above us danced in the light breeze, creating a mosaic of light and shadow on the forest floor. Every now and then, Amy would stop topic wildflowers, her collection growing with every step. About an hour into our hike west, stumbled upon something unexpected, an old cabin hidden in the thicker part of the woods. It stood the rare leak of Abigaunor, its walls weathered and beaten by time, the roof partially caved in. I felt a chill run down my spine as I approached it. There was something unsettling about this forgotten structure, a sense of stories untold, of secrets kept hidden by the silent trees that stood guard around it. Tyler was already heading towards it. His curiosity piqued, but I called him back. Let's not get too close, Ty. I cautioned. It doesn't look safe. Amy seemed disappointed, her adventurous spirit dampened by my warning. Joyce squeezed my hand a sigh. Lent note of agreement with my decision. We decided to take a break, sitting on a fallen log near the cabin as we snacked on granola bars and apples. I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that we were being watched. The woods saunts, a source of serenity, now felt like they held a lurking presence. We continued our hike, but the cabin stayed with me like a shadow at the back of my mind. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see something or someone following us. Joyce noticed my uneasy. Everything okay? She asked. Yeah, just can't shake the feeling about the Akub. And I replied, trying to sound more casual than I felt. We made our way back to the campsite, the laughter and chatter from the kids easing some of the tension that had built up inside me. But as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the campground, a sense of foreboding settled over the forest. With its inning depths seemed to whisper secrets in a language only it understood. That night, as we sat around the campfire, the flames casting a warm glow against the encroaching darkness, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. It was as if the four Stwash holding its breath, waiting for something to break the silence of the night, and then it came as cream, distant yet distinct, slicing through the calm of the night like a knife. In that moment, our peaceful retreat transformed into something else entirely, something primal and unsettling. As the echoes of that scream faded into the night, I knew our adventure had just taken an unexpected turn. The night had fallen like a thick curtain over the campground, wrapping everything in a shroud of darkness. Only pierced by our campfire's glow was sat around the fire. The kids are. Oasting marshmallows, their faces illuminated by the flickering light, laughter, and stories filling the air. It was a picture-perfect moment, one of those you wish you could freeze in time. But as the night deepened, the forest around us seemed to grow denser, more ominous. There was a stillness in the air, the kind that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. It tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just the wild playing tricks on my city-tuned senses. Joyce and I stayed up a little longer after tucking the kids into the camper. We sat by the dying fire, sip, pinging her beer stocking in hushed-ness. There's something about being out in the wilderness that brings out deeper conversations, ones that get lost in the everyday hustle. Then cutting through the night came a sound that sent a jolt of fear straight to my core, scream distanty, yet unmistakably human, a sound of pure terror that echoed through the silent woods. Joy's hand gripped mine, her eyes wide with alarm. The kids, awakened by the noise, peeked out of the camper, their faces as etched with fear. What was that? Dad Tyler's voice trembled slightly, trying to sound burr. Averth he felt. I'm not sure, buddy. Probably just an animal. Is Ed trying to sound reassuring? But the look in Joyce's eyes told me she wasn't buying. We decided to retreat to the safety of our camper, locking behind us the thin walls. Felt like the only barrier between use and the unknown. Terrors lurking in the darkling in bed, and every creak and rustle of the wind sent my imagination into overdrive. I could tell Joyce was awake to her steady breathing, a little too forced, seemed endless, every sound amplified in the deafening silence that followed. The scream, I lay there, my mind racing, trying to piece together what could have made such a sound, a lost camper, an animal in distress, or something more sinister. As the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, Will emerged from the camper. Tired and uneasy, the peacefulness of the previous day was gone, replaced by a sense of vulnerability, of not being alone over break fast. Joyce and I debated whether to pack up and leave, but the kids, still clinging to the excitement of camping, convinced us to stay one more day. We can't let new weird noise ruin our trip. Tile argued, his voice a mix of bravado and the desire to not let this fear show. Reluctantly, Joyce and I agreed, deciding to stick close to the camper for the day. But as we went about our activities, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The woods seemed to have eyes, and the tranquility we had once felt was now replaced by a lingering sense of dread as the day wore on. The unease grew. The once inviting forest now felt like a maze of shadows and unknown dangers, and as night approached again, sodded the realization that we were in a place where the line between the known and the unknown was as thin as the tent walls that separated us from the dark. The morning after the scream was a pale imitation of the day before the sun rose, all right, but its light seemed filtered, as if the very brightness was wary of touching our campsite. Joyce was quiet as she made break fast, her movements mechanical. The kids tried to play near the camper, but their laughter was forced, their glances towards the woods frequent and nervous. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, every rustle in the bushes, every snap of at wigs, and a surge of adrenaline through me. The forest transformed from a place of wonder to Ariel Mofun's seen eyes and hidden threats. The departure of our neighboring campers did nothing to ease our minds. Their empty sights stood as a silent testament to the terror of the night. Before we spent the day close to the camper activities subdued. The kids drew in their sketchbooks, the images darker, more jagged than usual. Joyce read a book, but often looked up, scanning the tree line. I busied myself with minor repairs on the camper, though my mind was ever straining to hear any sound out of the ordinary. As the day wore on, the sky began to darken, clouds rolling in like an ominous premonition. By the time we cooked dinner, thunder rumbled in the distance, wet mostly in silence. The storms approached, mirroring our growing apprehension. The first drops of rain fell. As we cleared the table, we hurried inside the camper. The wind, beginning to howl like a beast, awakened. Lightning flashed, each bolt illuminating the forest in stark, surreal detail. The thunder was no longer a distant threat, but right upon us, shaking the camper with its fury. In the cacophony of the storm, a new sound to me, argello guttural moaning that seemed to rise from the very earth beneath. Use it was a sound of anguish and rage, unlike anything I'd ever heard. The kids huddled close to Joyce, their eyes wide with fear. What is that? Dad Amy's voice was a whisper barely audible over the storm. I don't know, sweetheart. I replied, trying to mask my own fear. The moaning grew louder, accompanied now by the sounds of something large moving through the underbrush, the snapping of branches, the rust of leaves, if a massive creature was making its way towards our campsite. Joyce and I exchanged Dal Ucasalent agreement that we needed to protect our children at all costs. I grabbed a flashlight and a camping knife, fee blew upons, but all I had the sound stopped abruptly, leaving only the storm's rage. We sat there, not daring to breathe, each of us lost in our own fears of what lurked outside. The navel-ending light flood through the windows, followed by the piercing sound of a bullhorn. Come out with your hands up. Wes stumbled outside, blinded by the light, to find two police officers, guns drawn, scanning the tree line. There's a dangerous animal on the loose, one of them's. Howled over the roar of the storm. We need to get you out of here. Wouldn't need to be told twice. Packing in haste, you withdrew her belongings into the camper. The storm raged around us, but it was nothing compared to the fear of what might be hiding in those woods as we drove away, escorted by the police. Their relief was palpable. But the questions remained: what was out there, what had stalked us through the trees? And Weaver feels Afy in the wilderness. Again, the drive away from the campground was surreal. The rain still poured down, relentless as if trying to cleanse the forest. Ophid secrets in the rearview mirror. The woods receded, ed into the darkness, taking with them the terror of the last 2 days. Joyce sat beside me, her eyes fixed on the winding road ahead. The kids were in the back, huddled together under a blanket. Buster curled up at their feet. The only sound was the rain drumming against the camper and the occasional muted SOB from Amy as we put miles between us and the campground. The tension slowly began to unravel. Tyler, who had tried to play the brave older brother, finally let his guard down and fell asleep. Joyce reached over and squee. As did my hand, excellent, thank you for getting us out of the re. I kept replaying the events in my mind, trying to make sense of it. All the scream in the night, the feeling of being watched, the animal noises during the storm, and then the police, their urgent warnings, their expressions. It was like a scene from a nightmare, except it was all too real. West Opta to diner on the way home. The bright lights and the bustle of people, a stark contrast to the isolation we just experienced. The kids ate quietly, their usual energy subdued. Joyce and I exchanged small talk wit. The waitress, Bitter's miles, were forced our thoughts. Elsewhere, the rest of the drive home was quiet. We were all lost in our own thoughts, processing the events in our own way. When we finally pulled into our driveway, it was like returning from another world, our home. Home with its familiar comforts felt like a sanctuary. Unpacking was a silent fetch item we took out of the camper, was our reminder of our ordeal. The camping gear once as symbols of adventure and escape now felt tainted. We decided then, and the retupute all away, maybe for good that night, as we settled into our own beds. The safety of our home enveloped us, but the shadows of the forest lingered in the corners of our minds. The kids slept in our room, needing the reassurance of our presence. Joyce and I lay awake for a long time, talking in whispers about what had happened. We should have left after the first night. Joyce said, her voice tinged with guilt. We couldn't have known. I replied, though, shared her regret. The next morning, over breakfast, we made a pact to never return to those woods. The kids surprisingly agreed. The adventure they had once craved had turned into a lesson about the unpredictability of nature and the fragility of our place in it. In the weeks that followed, we tried to return to our normal routine, but the experiences stayed with us. Sometimes in the quiet off the night, I would wake up to the sound of a distant scream, only to realize it was just the wind. Whenever did find out what the police were tracking in those woods, part of me wanted to know, to put an enemy to our fear. But another part was content to let remain a mystery, a shadow in the forest, best left undiscovered as for our next vacation. Joyce's suggestion of the beach sound, Ed perfect, the open sky, the endless sea, a far cry from the claustrophobic embrace of the woods. We needed a place to help, to rebuild our sense of adventure in a world that suddenly seemed a lot bigger and a lot more unpredictable. The sun had barely crested over the jagged outline of Black Mesa when I loaded the last of my gear into the caravan. The Arizona sky, a canvasophyry or Aegis in soft pinks, stretched above the barren landscape. I couldn't shake off a nagging sense of foreboding, a feeling that this trip would be different from the others. As a regular on these supply caravans, I had grown accustomed to the vast open spaces of the desert, the way the earth stretched endlessly under the blazing sun. But today, the land seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. Secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to. Here I glanced at the Peabody coal mining operations in the distance, an ever-present reminder of the complex relationship between the land and its resources. We were here to assist the communities affected by the mining, to bring supplies and a semblance of comfort, yet amidst the crawling machinery and dust. I often wondered if we were really making a difference. My thoughts were interrupted by Buck, or caravan leader, a man as rugged as the terrain wet traversed. "Amanda, you set the called out," his voice carrying over the hume of engines and the chatter of my fellow Volun. "Tears, yeah, all good," I replied, forcing a smile. I admired Buck's unwavering optimism, even if I couldn't always share it. As we stopped, the convoy of trucks kicked up a haze of dust, swallowing the path behind us. As I sat in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle, my gaze fixed on the unyielding horizon. The caravan members, a mix of seasoned volunteers and wide-eyed newcomers, chatted excitedly, their enthusiasm moon-affected by the early hour. It tried to join in the conversation, to lose myself in the mundane details of logistics and supply counts, but my mind kept drifting back. Of the conversation I had with an alumnus just a few days before about his eerie experience in the Sevri land, she spoke of shadows that moved with intent and whispers in the wind that sounded almost human. I had laughed it off, the native fence, against the chill that ran down my spine as the caravan snaked its way through the undulating landscape. It noticed the subtle changes in the terrain. The dry arroyos, which lay dormant under the sun, were like scars on the earth, reminders of the fleeting wrath of rain. I knew these natural pathways could turn into raging torrents with little warning, much like these secrets that seemed to lurk just beneath the surface of this land. The caravan came to a stator first checkpoint, a routine pause to an everything was in order. I stepped out of the truck, stretching my legs and taking in the vast expanse of wilderness that surrounded us. The beauty of the place was undeniable, yet it felt like an untamed beast, beautiful but dangerous. I looked up at the sky, now a brilliant blue, and took a deep breath. This was more than just a supply route. It was a journey into the heart of land rich with stories and mysteries, a land that held its secrets close. And as we moved deeper into the heart of Black Mesa, it couldn't help but feel that we were not just visitors here. We were part of a story yet, to unfold a story that would test or resolve and perhaps reveal truths we weren't ready to face. The heat of the midday sun was relentless, a scorching presence that seemed intent on draining every ounce of moisture from my body. I pulled my hat lower over my eyes, trying to shield myself from the harsh glare, as I watched a lambit's coatus, white as the cumulus clouds dotting the sky, dart playfully away. Roam the enclosure, it was a harmless escape, a brief moment of freedom for the animal, but for me it was the beginning of an unforeseen ordeal. Ease it off. After the lamb, my boots kicking up small clouds of dust. With each step, the land around Black Mesa was deceptive. What appeared flat and navigable from a distance was a labyrinth of dips and rises and hidden crevices up close. I kept my eyes on the lamb, which seemed to hope fruitlessly over the rugged terrain, blissfully unaware of my growing concern. As I ventured farther from the camp, the familiar landmarks began to ball. Urantuni and other, the vastness of the landscape engulf Edmeen, and a creeping sense of disorientation settled in the lamb, now a distant speck, vanished over a rise, and I hastened my pace, determined not to lose a sight of it. I reached the crest of Asmal Hill, panting from the effort below. The land stretched out in all directions at a pestry of earth and sky. With no sign of the lamb or the path back to the caravan, a surge of panic gripped me. I was lost, utterly lost in a sea of dust and sun-scorched rocks. It tried to retrace my steps, but the land seemed to shift and change with eek. Turned, my breaths became shallow, my chest tight. The asthma, had I had kept at bay for so long, chose that moment to rear its ugly head. It fumbled for my inhaler, my fingers trembling, but it was not there in my haste to chase the lamb. I had left it behind. The world began to spin, a dizzying, disorienting sensation that overwhelmed my senses. I struggled to breathe, each inhalation a battle against the tightening grip in my chest. My vision blurred the edges of my consciousness. Fraying Hispanic and hyperventilation took hold, and then darkness when I came to the world was a die. For in place the sun had surrendered to the moon, and the land was bed in its pale silvery light. Izatup disoriented my head, throbbing with a Dulachet. The temperature had dropped, the night air cool against my skin, a stark contrast to the day's heat. I listened, hoping to hear the familiar sounds of the caravan in the distance, but there was only silence, a chilling, oppressive silence that seemed to weigh down on Meth, and the snap of twigs harping clear in the stillness of the night. I turned, my heart pounding in my chest and in the dim moonlight, as a widow dark shape huddled behind a tree watching me for a moment. It thought it was a person, perhaps one of the caravan members come to find me, but as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized it was something else, something not quite human. It was then that fear-rawned primal took hold of me, fear that seemed to seep into my very bones. I was no longer just lost in the wilderness. I was lost in a world that was no longer familiar, a world where shadows hid secrets and the night whispered of things best left unseen. The night was eerily quiet as I stared at the shadowy figure behind the tree. My mind raced. Questions, yet my voice was paralyzed in my throat. The figure seemed to be observing me, its presence both curious and menacing in that moonlit moment. The landscape of Black Mesa transformed from a familiar terrain into Ariomo Funk known threats, compelled by a mix of fear and curiosity. I called out hesitantly, "Hello, is someone?" There my voice sounded alien in the stillness, and the figure remained motionless, a dark sentinel against the pale bark of the tree. It took a tentative step forward, my heart pounding against my ribs. "I'm with the Colorado Caravan," I continue. My voice quivering, "I think I'm lost." There was a pause, a breathless, stretched moment where the world seemed to hold its breath. Then the figure slowly emerged from behind the tree. To my bewildered relief, it appeared to be Charlie, a fellow caravan member. Relief washed over me in an overwhelming wave. "Charlie," I called out, my voice tinged with disbelief and hope. The figure motioned for me to follow, and I hesitated only for a moment before complying. My mind was foggy, my judgment clouded by the relief of seeing a familiar face. We walked in silence, the figure leading. Through Theo's winding paths, the moon cast long haunting shadows across the landscape, turning every rock and bush into a potential threat. My senses were heightened, every snap of a twig or rustle of the wind sending jolts of fear through me. After what felt like an eternity, another figure materialized from the shadows. Ahead of us, my heart skipped a beat. This new presence was unexpected, and a sharp bolt of pain, like the onset of a severe migraine, struck me. It stopped dead in my tracks, my head throbbing with an intensity that bordered on unbearable, is quinted through. Aught the pain, and as my eyes adjusted, I saw more figures emerging, forming a semicircle around us. Panic surged within me. These were not humans. Their forms were distorted, more akin to large coyotes standing on their hind legs with an unsettling human-like posture. My breath caught in my throat as it stared into their eyes. 10 glowing orbs reflecting the moon's dim light. I was frozen in place, a primal part of my brain screaming at Metarun to escape the nightmare unfolding before me. But I couldn't move. The figures remained still, their gaze fixed on Meth. Silence was oppressive, punctuated only by my rag breathing and the pounding of my heart. The Nasafon, some unspoken command, they slowly began to advance. Adrenaline kicked in, shattering my paralysis. It turned and ran stumbling over the uneven ground, my only thought to put as much distance between myself and those unearthly creatures as possible. I heard another twig snap behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I was no longer just lost. I was being hunted, and in that terrifying realization, I knew that the legends and whispers of Black Mesa were more than just stories. They were a warning one. I had failed to heed. My lungs burned as Iran, each breath a ragged gasp hint the cold night air. The sounds of pursuit seemed to echo from every direction, a cacophony of rustling and snapping that kept pace with my frantic heartbeat. The moonlit landscape of Black Mesa had become a nightmarish maze, with each turn and twist plunging me deeper into terror. I didn't dare look back, fearing that the sight of those coyote-like figures might paralyze me with fear. Their haunting eyes, glowing in the darkness, were etched into my memory, a chilling reminder that it was prey in a hunt. I didn't understand. Suddenly, salvation appeared in the most unlikely form. The headlights of a vehicle cutting through the darkness. It was a Peabody mine worker driving along a service road. Desperation lent me new energy, and I burst from the brush, waving my arms frantically. The truck screeched to a halt, and the driver, a rugged man with a face weathered by the Arizona sun, peered out at me with a mix of surprise and concern. "What in the hell are you doing out here?" Hissed, his voice gruff with confusion. I didn't have the luxury of coherence. "Please, sped, I need help. I'm lost and something's chasing me." Without waiting for an invitation, I clambered into the passenger seat. The driver hesitated for only a moment before hitting the gas, the truck lurching forward as we drove away. I risked a glance in the rear view mirror in the fading glow of the brake lights. Saw them, those haunting eyes glowing ominously in the darkness. My heart pounded against my ribcage, a drumbeat of fear and relief. The driver, casting wary glances my way, asked no further questions. I could only imagine what I looked like, a wild-eyed, disheveled mess babbling about being chased by creatures out of a nightmare. Eventually, the lights of the caravan's camp came into view, a beacon of safety in the unforgiving wilderness. The driver stopped at the edge of the camp, clearly reluctant to venture further into what I likely considered superstitious nonsense. It stumbled out of the truck, mumbling thanks. And assurance is that our caravan leader, Buck, would explain everything. My legs felt like jelly, my mind still reeling from the night's horrors. I ran towards the safety of the camp, but at the last moment, I veered off towards Johnny's family. Hogan, I knew it was a breach of cultural respect to seek refuge in a Navajo family's home, uninvited, especially as a non-native, but terror had stripped away all social norms and protocols. Johnny's parents, an elderly couple who spoke only, looked up in surprise as I burst into their Hogan. My attempts to explain were a jumble of broken sobs and disjointed words, yet something in my panic demeanor transcended the language barrier. Johnny's father's paled as she pieced together my story. He quickly moved to the window, peering out into the night with a grave expression. Meanwhile, Johnny's mother went to the stove, her movements deliberate and purposeful. She collected a small pan of ashes, which she sprinkled onto a handful of bullets, loading them into 357 revolver. Her voice zinging what I assumed to be in a prayer was both comforting and ominous. They allowed me to stay, a gesture of kindness that I would never forget as I lay there listening to the soft murmurs of their prayers. I knew that I had crossed into a world where ancient beliefs and modern nightmares collided, and for a long, restless night, I hovered on the edge of that world praying for dawn. The first light of dawn crept through the small openings of the Hogan, casting a soft golden glow on the woven rugs and simple furnishings. I lay there exhausted yet restless, the events of the night replaying in my mind like a haunting melody. Johnny's parents were already awake, moving quietly with a sense of purpose that spoke of deep-rooted traditions and an unspoken understanding of the night's terror. Eyes atop, my body aching from the tension and fear. The memory of those glowing eyes in the darkness was still vivid, a stark reminder of the inexplicable events I had encountered. Johnny's mother offered me a cup of tea, her eyes reflecting a mix of concern and wisdom. I accepted it with a nod, me throat too tight for words. Johnny arrived shortly after, his expression a mixture of worry and relief. Upon seeing me, his parents spoke to him in hushed in their gestures, and tongue conveying more than I could understand. He turned to me, his face is serious. The medicine man is coming to see. He said, he'll performable sing it. It's important, I nodded feel. In a mixture of gratitude and apprehension, the idea of Abel Sing seemed both alien and necessary, a bridge between my understanding of the world and the mysteries I had just experienced. The medicine man arrived with the sun fully rising, casting long shadows across the desert landscape. He was an elderly man, his face lined with the stories and wisdom of years. I could only imagine he spoke no English, but his presence alone was a comfort that began his ritual burning sage and chanting in a rhythmic cadence that filled the Hogan with a sense of ancient power as she prayed over me, full to gradual easing of the tension that had gripped me since the previous night. It was as if his words were weaving a protective shield around me, warding off the darkness that had threatened to consume me after the ceremony. Johnny spoke quietly with his father, then turned to me. We're cutting the trip short. They said the walkers won't bother us now that we're leaving, but it's better not to take chances. The term walkers sent a chill down my spine. A confirmation of the supernatural elements. I had tried to dismiss. Johnny seemed to read my thoughts. It's Ra. Before them to show themselves, he explained. You were unlucky, or maybe lucky in a way. Not many people see them and walk away. His were meant to reassure, but they left me with more questions than answers. The drive back to civilization was quiet, each of us lost in our thoughts. The vast landscape of Black Mesa stretched out around, used unchanged by the events that had unfolded as well off the reservation. I looked back, half expecting to see those haunting eyes on last time, but there was only the open desert, indifferent and unyielding. I knew one thing for certain: my view of the world had changed. The boundaries between reality and legend, between the scene had blurred. And while I was safe for now, the mystery of what I had encountered would stay with me, lingering shadow at the edge of my consciousness. It made excellent vow, then more caravan form, and not after this, the wild, untamed beauty of Black Mesa was something I would admire from a distance, respecting its secrets and the ancient powers that dwelled within. Several months ago, I found myself in a deeply unsettling situation. It was a typical evening, and I was making my way home after a long, long day work in the bustling city. My house, nestled in the suburbs, lay a considerable distance from the city, necessitating an hour-long drive every night after my 10 p.m. Shift the journey primarily through desolated roads, since outside the urban sprawl was usually uneventful, albeit time-consuming on this particular night. It felt unusually weary, the kind of fatigue that doesn't stem from any specific cause, but simply accumulates over a day. I was about half an hour from home, cruising along a solitary single-lane highway, when my attention was jolted awake by an unexpected obstruction in the road under the dim glow of the streetlights. I could vaguely discern something blocking my path. I cautiously eased onto the brakes, the fog, momentarily obscuring my view. As it inched closer, the fog lifted, revealing a massive tree sprawled across the entire road. Confusion set in. There had been Norcent storms or strong winds, and the road had been clear when I left in the morning, leaving my care running, but in park, I stepped out to investigate the surrounding areas, showed no signs of other fallen trees or damage. Approaching the tree, I realized it stretched from one forest edge to the other, leaving no room to pass. The oddity of the situation began to our, especially when I considered the nearest detour was a 15-minute drive back, adding an hour to me already long journey. Contemplating calling for help, I stood by the tree, lost in thought. That's when a light suddenly pierced through the branches from the other side. It wasn't an approaching vehicle. The car must have been the real Ready, its lights only now flicking on as it tried to peer through the foliage. The sound of a car door opening and closing reached me, followed by footsteps. "Cello," I called out, attempting to alleviate the tension. A mumble came in response, but it seemed unrelated to my greeting. I assumed the O. Third person was clearly frustrated with the roadblock. Then the branches began to move her, ustling as a figure clambered over the tree. Instinctively retreated towards my cart. The figure, a man with a short beard and buzz cut, dressed in a thick jacket, landed on my side of the road. His approach was silent, his face expressionless. I hurried into my car, my instinct screaming danger. The man quickened his pace, reaching my window. Just as I closed the door, he stared blankly at me, knocking on the glass without a word. "What do you need?" I asked, my voice tinged with fear. He continued. "Oh," knocked now more aggressively, his fists pounding against the window. In a panic, it threw the car into reverse, a dull thud sounding as the door latch presumably tore from his grasp. That sound confirmed my worst fears. Is punt the car around and sped off too, focused to a vain glance in the rearview mirror. Once I reached the bypass, stopped to report the incident. Predictably, the man and his car were gone when authorities arrived. I later learned that the tree had been deliberately cut down, an act that made the evening news due to its seemingly malicious intent. Whether this rangeman was responsible remained a mystery. Since that night, I haven't experienced anything similar on that route, but evening as I drive home, even on my most exhausted days, I find myself wide awake, alert, and watchful, haunted by the memory of that eerie encounter on the road. I was 29 years old when this harrowing incident unfolded. It was a chilly winter evening, and my husband and I had made plans to visit his parents' house outside the city where we intended to stay for a few weeks. Given my husband's late work hours, we decided it would be better for me to set out with our 5-year-old daughter earlier in the day, while he would follow a couple of hours later as we hit the road at around 3:00 p.m. I couldn't help but feel a sense of confidence that we would reach our destination without any trouble. However, the winter nights came quickly, and by 4:30 p.m., it was already pitch black outside. We were still about an hour and a half away from my in-laws' house, and while I didn't have a particular sense of foreboding as a mother, I couldn't help but have concerns lurking in the back of my mind. We were driving down a desolate back road with no streetlights, and the feeling of utter isolation began to gnaw me ever. The less I tried to shake off my unease, reassuring myself that we'd soon arrive safely. After all, we had driven this route countless times without incident, around 30 minutes from our destination. I noticed flashing lights in the distance, 2 blinking yellow lights in the middle of the road, which I quickly identified as hazard lights on a car. A sense of dread washed over me as I realized that this car wasn't pulled over to the side, but was blocking the road entirely. I brought the car to a stop about 80 to 100 feet away from the stranded vehicle, trying to decide what to do. Thing I was certain of was that I couldn't risk stopping to help these strangers alone in my late 20s with my young daughter. it would have been reckless to put ourselves in harm's way. You made up my mind to call for help once we were safely away. I assumed any woman in my situation would prioritize her and her child's safety. Above all else is sitting there, I must have spent what felt like an eternity contemplating my next move with no cell service. I couldn't reach my husband or father-in-law. Ultimately, I decided to turn around, head back, but it wasn't that simple. On at Wu Lane Road, a three-turn would take too long. Just as I hesitated, my rearview mirror caught sight of shadows rapidly approaching in the moonlight. They were about 3. 0 behind my Carandas. They drew nearer. I realized they were people seemingly carrying something. I couldn't stay put any longer. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. It shifted the car into drive and floored the gas pedal while it wasn't a high-performance vehicle. It responded wanted enough to put distance between use and those approaching figures. As I passed by, more people emerged from the roads. I'd hurling objects in a desperate attempt to stop me. Sides wiped one of them, and my windshield was struck and cracked by a projectile. It screamed from the IM. Packed in my daughter in turn began to cry. I reassured her as best I could, but she was just 5 years old, and my words did little to console her. My soul focus remained on getting use away from those people. Before I knew it, we were pulling up to my in-law's street, which had a guarded entrance. I pressed the button to be allowed in, and the security personnel immediately recognized our distress when they answered. We were granted access, and my father-in-law met me at the driveway armed with a gun. I was in tears, and my daughter clung to her grandmother, equally distraught. Inside, I recounted everything that had transpired. My father-in-law, fiercely protective of us, was visibly angered by the ordeal. He repeatedly inquired if they had followed us to this location, but I couldn't be certain as I hadn't been paying attention to the cars behind us. I was solely focused on reaching the safety of their house. My in-laws were known for their strict security measures, complete with numerous firearms and surveillance cameras both inside and outside their property. They examined the security footage and noticed a car passing by their front. T-Gator repeatedly, as if it was circling the area. Realizing the gravity of the situation, we decided to contact the police. Unfortunately, they informed us that they couldn't assist because it wasn't considered an emergency and was beyond their city limits. My father-in-law made it explicitly clear that anyone entering their property would be dealt with if necessary, and the police acknowledged his rights before hanging up, harmed my mother-in-law, and instructed us to wait inside the house while he went outside to inspect the property. We anxiously watch, head the security cameras, and as she approached the gate, the Cara turned. This time it stopped right at the gate, and 2 individuals got out. They seemed oblivious to my father-in-law's approach and began pushing the gates. Since we couldn't Arthur exchange, all we saw was my father-in-law firing a shot into the air. Yelling at them, they hastily retreated to their car and sped away. My husband arrived an hour later, filled with apologies for having allowed me to drive alone. I assured him that it wasn't his fault and that the outcome would have been the same if he had been with us. The most important thing was that we were safe. A few days later, we learned that there had been several carjackings in the area. Fortunately, Noon had been seriously injured during these incidents. It shuddered to think about what might have happened had I not spotted those individuals approaching us from behind. I remain grateful that we emerged from that nightmarish situation unharmed, and I've since made it a point never to drive at night without proper protection, whether it's my husband or a firearm. I'll never forget that fateful night. My girlfriend Jessica and I were the adventurous type, always seeking to escape the confines of her home and immerse ourselves in the great outdoors. We had jobs that allowed us to our own schedules, working for a larger company, but maintaining the freedom to choose when and where we worked. It was this freedom that led us to embark on a camping trip deep into the wilderness, away from the hustle and bustle of city life. As twilight cast long shadows over the rugged terrain, we decided to go camping for about a week. Our destination was a state park known for its untouched beauty, and the fact that you could camp there for free without the need for permits or approval. We eagerly packed our bags, eager for the adventure that lay ahead. We drove along a dirt road for what seemed like hours, completely engulfed in the darkness of the night. It was then that he made a terrible mistake. I didn't turn on my high beams. I couldn't fathom why I hadn't thought of it earlier, and this oversight would haunt me for the rest of my life. To make matters worse, I was driving too fast for the treacherous terrain. and the combination of factors would lead us down a harrowing path. Suddenly, Jess let out a blood-curdling scream, and in the faint moonlight, we both saw it, a massive fallen tree blocking our path with little time to react. Islam had on the brakes, desperately hoping we could stop before colliding with the obstacle. But luck was not on our side that night. The sickening crash into the tree sent Maintown consciousness for a few seconds. When I came to, my head was throbbing and the ring in my ears was deafening. But my immediate concern was Jessica in the dim light. I could see. After their eyes were closed and she was unresponsive, panic set in my phone became my lifeline, as if humbled to turn on the flashlight, directing its beam toward her. What is always beyond anything I could have ever imagined. Blood stark against their white shirt stained her chest. It was then that I noticed the branch about the circumference of a finger protruding through her chest. A gruesome sight that defied comprehension. It was still attached to the tree, the cruel instrument of war tragedy, fearful of causing further harm. I refrained from touching her. I reached for my phone to dial 911, but there was no signal in this remote location. Desperation took hold. As I considered our limited options, the truck wouldn't start, making escape impossible. My pocket held a small knife, and it became the only glimmer of hope in the darkness. Climbing onto the hood of the truck, I attempted to cut the branch, but the small knife made little progress. Panic surged through my precious minutes past, and Jessica remained unconscious. An agonizing hour ticked by, and I could do nothing but pray, a strange act for someone who had long abandoned Fa. Ithic clung to hope, praying for hours in what felt like an eternity. I dared to hope because miraculously Jessica was not actively bleeding during that hour. The branch had missed her heart, offering a slim chance of survival. I checked her pulse. It was weak, but it persisted. All I could do was wait for help that seemed impossibly distant. Then, like an answer to my prayers or a stroke of luck, as a headlights approaching from behind, as my heart raced as I leaped out of the truck, screaming and waving frantically. The driver pulled up behind us and rolled down his window. Amanding talk know what was wrong. I rushed to explain our dire situation, stammering through the details. It took a moment for him to grasp the gravity of the situation. He cursed under his breath and shone his flashlight on Jessica, confirming our worst fears. Without hesitation, the man retrieved a chainsaw from his truck, and it rumbled at the thought of what lay ahead. He began awing the branch about a foot in front of Jessica's chest, while I covered her with a blanket to protect her from the sawdust. The vibrations of the chainsaw, though unsettling, didn't stir her fin. Ally, the branch was severed, and Jessica was free from her wooden prison. The man and I handled her with the utmost care, placing her gently in the back seat of his truck. I joined him in the passenger seat, and he sped down the treacherous mountain road, heading toward help. Jessica remained unconscious throughout the journey, where rived at an EMT station, a place I had not known existed in this remote wilderness. The medical personnel were surprised by our unexpected arrival. They quickly transferred her to an ambulance, and I climbed in with her nearest the hospital was. Not too far away, thank goodness, but it lacked a trauma center. She needed to be airlifted to a larger city an hour away by helicopter. The doctor's grimaces revealed that she had a punctured lung, but her heart remained unscathed. If the branch had been an inch to the left, she would have perished within minutes. Jessica spent almost 2 weeks in a coma. When she finally awakened, her pain was excruciating and she struggled to speak due to the trauma. Her chest, she endured extensive surgeries to repair the damage, but the possibility of a lung transplant loomed. In the future, it was grateful beyond measure that she had survived, and I remained in close contact with the man who had saved her life, though Jessica still depended on oxygen and experienced breathing difficulties. We attended her monthly appointments, determined to help her on the long road to recovery. We understood that full recovery might be elusive, but we were prepared to face whatever lay ahead together. I asked Jessica to marry me while she was still in the hospital, and she said yes. Regardless of the challenges ahead, I looked forward to spending the rest of our lives together. That night will forever be etched in our memories, and while I struggle to forgive myself for the accident, I am grateful that it's a memory Jessica doesn't have to bear. It was a dark, moonless night, and the clock on my dashboard read 3 a.m. I was exhausted, driving home from a work meeting that had run late. This meeting was a once-a-year ordeal, and it had taken place a grueling 8 hours away from my workplace. The long, desolate roads stretched out before me, winding through the countryside. Driving through this part of the state was always a dreary experience. Outside the city, it was mostly farmland with miles and miles of plain fields of crops, so at least on these barren roads I could space out and only had to focus on keeping my care on a straight path as I continued on my journey seemingly endless. Fields of crops blurred by in the darkness then out of nowhere, as though a massive gap in the crops to the right of the road. It was as if a part of the field had been torn away, revealing a car wedged deep into the crops, so it looked like the vehicle had careened off the road and became hopelessly entangled. This sight was unexpected, and I couldn't quite understand how driving into a field of crops could be all that harmful. It certainly didn't seem serious enough for me to call for help, especially since there was still service out here. The car was also highly silent, its engine of, which led me to believe that the driver had already been picked up or had walked away from the scene. I continued driving, putting the peculiar sight behind me. Just a minute or two down the road, I noticed a set of headlights approaching in front of me. These I drew closer. It became apparent that the vehicle ahead was moving at an exceptionally slow pace. I had to swerve into the other lane to pass at the speed limit. On this highway was 80 miles per hour, but the car in front of me couldn't have been going more than 25 miles per hour. It was a dangerous pace for such a late hour after I passed. The sluggish vehicle, I expected it to speed up and disappear into the distance. Instead, to my astonishment, it merged into the oncoming traffic lane and pulled up alongside my car. It turned my gaze to the driver's side window and was met with a chilling sight, a man appearing to be in his mid-40s with long, disheveled hair and an unkempt beard was staring directly into my eyes. What was unsettling was that it didn't seem angry. Instead, he wore a faint ominous smirk. Feeling my nerves fray, shifted my focus back to the road, hoping that the biz-air encounter would end the air. However, the car beside me abruptly sped up, swerving in front of me and slamming on its brakes. I had to react quickly to avoid a collision, and it too slammed on my brakes, skidding to a halt behind the strange car, then maneuvered to block both lanes of the road, leaving me trapped. I sat there in shock about 15 feet behind the mysterious car, unable to comprehend the severity of the situation. The man wusted, note him jumping out of his car and sprinting directly toward me. In one hand, he brandished a gun, and now had a hood pulled over his head. Panics urged through. Ahmes, I realized the danger I was in with no time to spare. If floored the gas pedal, desperately trying to escape, my car lurched forward. But for a terrifying moment, it felt as though it wouldn't respond. Panic clawed at my throat, and a wave of terror coursed through. Me's imagined the horrors that could await. Me had the other car I'd seen earlier in the crops fallen victim to this menacing stranger as well. Suddenly, my wheels found traction, and I was able to swerve my car out of the field and onto the other side of the road. In the distance, Asing gun shot echoed a chillin. Greminder off the danger I had narrowly escaped. My heart pounded as I sped away from that horrifying encounter. I dialed 911, my voice trembling, and provided every detail of what had just transpired. I also mentioned the car I had seen earlier wedged in the field of crops despite the police's efforts. The man who had tried to stop me on that desolate road was never found. They managed to locate the other car, but it was empty with no signs of the driver. It was as if they had abruptly veered off the road, become trapped, and then vanished without a trace. The eerie's hilarity between their situation and what could have happened to me sent shivers down my spine. If I had become stuck in that field, the other person, that car, might not have been the only one to disappear that fateful night.